Hey guys, tonight we're not just looking up at the stars, we're slipping between them, peeling back the velvet curtain of night to discover a world where gods make love through eclipses, where planets flirt, fight, and ghost each other like exes who never really got over it. You lie still beneath the canopy of a jungle sky, the kind that breathes. The air is thick with insects humming a tune older than any language. Somewhere, a jaguar coughs. Above you, the constellations aren't quiet, they're doing things. Things your school textbooks would never admit. In Mayan myths, the stars didn't just tell time. They told stories of lust and heartbreak, of betrayal and cosmic threesomes. And if you're hoping for some cuddly bedtime myth about a sunbeam and a moonflower falling in love, no, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. That way, when we talk about the night sky, you'll know exactly which celestial soap opera you're under. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you, before the myths, before the sex, is how the Mayans read the sky, like a therapist reads your childhood trauma. You think stars are distant, polite lights? To the Mayans, they were scandalous. They moved like lovers sneaking out windows, like rivals plotting revenge. A lunar eclipse wasn't just a shadow. It was the moon being devoured in punishment for past sins, maybe infidelity, maybe pride. Maybe she just got caught being herself. The moon, Ixchel, goddess of fertility, midwifery, healing, and yes, sex, wasn't a passive player. She was powerful, moody, and seduced, or clashed with the rain god Chaak in myth after myth. When it rained, sometimes it was passion. Sometimes it was heartbreak. Sometimes it was a cosmic booty call. You lie back and imagine it's midnight, 700 CE. A priest stands barefoot on a high stone platform, the jungle dark and restless around him. He doesn't just pray. He bleeds, pierces his tongue or penis to feed the gods. Blood is an offering, but it's also a bridge. In Mayan belief, the divine realm and the human body weren't separate. They overlapped. Through sex, pain, and trance, you could step into another world. The gods weren't up there. They were in you, waiting to be awakened through ritual, desire, or fear. Now, this isn't just about kinky gods. This is about cosmology as libido. The Mayan sky was like a giant erotic novel, and every planet had a role. Venus, for example, was the diva. She rose as the morning star, fell as the evening star, disappeared, then reappeared in a cycle the Mayans mapped with almost obsessive precision. Venus meant war, but she also meant seduction. When she rose, kings scheduled sacrifices and possibly orgies. There are stelae, stone carvings, where kings hold ritual objects that are suspiciously phallic, while Venus blazes in the background. Coincidence? Historians still argue whether these rituals were just symbolic or physically intimate, but come on, look at the art. Speaking of art, the Mayans loved portraying the cosmos with tangled limbs. Gods were shown in mid-transformation, man to serpent, woman to jaguar. Gender wasn't fixed. The rain god might appear male in one myth, female in another. Ixchel, our moon goddess, was both a youthful seductress and a wrinkled crone. And in between those extremes, ambiguity. Because in Mayan cosmology, fluidity was balance. Male and female energies had to merge, clash, and reform. They weren't binary, they were a dialogue, a breathy, complicated, sometimes inappropriate one. You start to realize Mayan intimacy wasn't private, it was cosmic. When people made love, it wasn't just about babies or pleasure. It was about harmony. You recreated the motions of the stars, the pulse of time, the push-pull of sun and moon. It's like tantric sex, but with way more astronomy and, let's be honest, better architecture. Let's go deeper. Imagine a young couple in a Mayan village. They've been paired by their families, but they sneak off for a moment alone, beneath the stars, of course. She wears red, symbolic of blood and vitality. He brings her a carved piece of jade, a symbol of life and eternity. The act that follows isn't just physical, it's ritual. The timing is based on the calendar. The location is aligned with celestial markers. Somewhere nearby, a ball game is being played. The rubber ball bounces, a metaphor for the sun moving through the underworld. The cheering, the rhythm, the sweat, they echo the couple's heartbeat. Their intimacy isn't an act of rebellion. It's an act of cosmic maintenance. By loving each other, they keep the world spinning. Now imagine another moment. A royal concubine whispers to the king during a Venus transit. She's not just tempting him, she's invoking a planetary force. Their coupling will be recorded as myth. A child born of that night might be said to carry the fire of Venus or the moon's secret rage. The scribe won't call it sex. He'll call it alignment, harmony, ritual fusion. And somewhere in the temple, a priest will burn copal and mark it all on bark paper, stashing the record in a stone chamber that won't be discovered until 1992. Fringe detail for tonight? Some scholars believe that Mayan midwives whispered the names of constellations during childbirth. They saw birth as a celestial event, a star emerging through pain. And you better believe that certain constellations were considered luckier than others. If you were born under the bat constellation, dark power. Under the crocodile, hunger and charm. Under the turtle, endurance. The Mayans weren't just tracking time, they were building sexual horoscopes before it was trendy. And now, a quick but juicy human anecdote. From Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings, we know that rulers throughout history used intimacy as diplomacy. In Mayan courts, royal women weren't just pretty ornaments. They were diplomats with perfume. One such woman, Lady Kabul of El Peru Waka, held military and political power, but also understood the symbolism of aligning her sexual life with celestial events. She timed her children's conceptions to eclipses. She held rituals when Venus changed phase. Her lovers, it said, were selected based on astrological omens and sacred dreams. Power wasn't just held, it was seduced. So here you are in the dark, letting the jungle breathe around you. Somewhere a toad croaks, a firefly pulses once, twice. The stars above aren't twinkling, they're staging drama. And as you listen, you begin to wonder, what does your own intimacy echo? A calendar? A planet? A long-forgotten myth where two gods touch briefly, then vanish across the sky, leaving just a glimmer and a story? The moon is watching you again, but not with some cold maternal gaze. She's side-eyeing you like she knows what you did last summer and is preparing to weep or seduce, depending on her mood. You shift under her glow, and suddenly her cratered surface isn't just geology, it's gossip. In Mayan myth, the moon goddess Ixchel wasn't born radiant. She was radiant because she defied expectation, loved who she wasn't supposed to love, and got punished for it in ways that still hang heavy in the sky. You begin to see the moon not as a celestial lamp, but as the remnant of scandal, love, betrayal, and haunting seduction. Once, she was human, or something like it. A young maiden full of life and laughter who caught the eye of the sun god Kinichahau. Sounds romantic, until you learn he wasn't exactly the loyal type. Theirs wasn't a love story. It was a celestial version of It's Complicated. He chased her, possessed her, lit her up with his intensity, and then turned distant and jealous when she didn't obey the role he carved for her. And like so many women in myth, she ran, not for safety, but for her autonomy. She slipped into the shadows, disappearing from his gaze, reinventing herself in phases. That's why the moon waxes and wanes, you're told. It's Ixchel hiding, healing, re-emerging stronger, and yes, sometimes flirting from behind the clouds when she's in the mood to be seen. The Mayans didn't need metaphors for toxic relationships. They embedded them in the sky. And the moon wasn't alone in her drama. She had sisters, rivals, and cosmic secrets. One myth even suggests that her light isn't her own, that she reflects the sun's fire only when she wants to remind him of what he lost. But the darkest version? It says she cheated, that she found comfort in another god's arms, possibly Venus, possibly one of the storm deities, and was cursed by her jealous lover, burned and banished into the sky to glow with shame. Historians still argue whether Ixchel's stories originate from earlier fertility deities or were shaped later to fit patriarchal frameworks. But either way, her legacy shines on every lover who ever needed a pause, a phase, a moment to withdraw and reclaim their name. And if that's not the most relatable goddess energy you've ever felt, you might want to check your moon sign. Down on Earth, the Mayan people used the moon's cycles not just to plant and harvest, but to marry, to conceive, and to divine. A child born during a full moon was believed to carry powerful dreams. One born during the waning crescent might be more introspective, less lucky in love. Women tracked their fertility alongside the moon's waxing. Midwives told stories of Ixchel's labor pains, echoing in the tides of women's bodies, and menstrual blood was considered sacred, a bridge to the divine, not something to be hidden. In fact, in one temple mural, there's a depiction of a woman offering a red-stained cloth to the moon in prayer, her face serene, her arms lifted not in shame but in ritual power. You stare up at the moon now and wonder, when did we stop seeing blood as a connection and start seeing it as taboo? Let's step sideways for a moment. Every culture has its cosmic scandals, but the Mayans weren't subtle about theirs. They put them in the codices, those folding bark paper books filled with drawings, calendars, and enough eroticism to make Victorian archaeologists blush. One particularly infamous page shows what appears to be two deities locked in an intimate embrace under a lunar glyph, their limbs looping together like vines, their eyes wide open, watching the stars. Some scholars argue this represents the unity of masculine and feminine forces. Others say it's a straight-up sex scene between moon and sun, and that it had calendrical implications. Either way, you're looking at astronomy through a lens that isn't cold and mechanical. It's heated, tangled, and deeply human, and deeply... Speaking of tangled, Ixchel didn't only rule the night. She was also associated with weaving. Imagine this. You walk into a Mayan village in the early morning. Smoke curls up from breakfast fires. Children chase each other past carved stelae, and in a shaded corner, women are hunched over backstrap looms. But they're not just making clothes. They're telling stories. Each thread is a line of myth, each pattern a coded prayer. And many of them are dedicated to Ixchel. They weave her rabbit companion, her crescent crown, the jaguar at her feet. But the most potent symbols? The intertwining of red and white thread, symbolizing blood and semen, union and creation. Not for decoration, for reverence. Let's not forget the men in these stories. Ixchel's lovers weren't limited to gods. In some variations, she sleeps with human kings, shamans, even warriors who impress her. She appears in dreams, seduces them, leaves behind visions, and disappears. You could call it divine intervention, or celestial booty calls. Either way, the result is often the same. A child, a prophecy, a kingdom's fate shifted by one night under her watchful eye. From Peter Webb's The Erotic Spirit Through History, we learn that goddess lovers appear across cultures as both inspiration and warning. But Ixchel was unique. She didn't belong to the realm of passive muses. She demanded agency, and if denied, she burned cities to ash with floods and storms. Quirky fact for tonight: some Mayan temples were designed so that moonlight would touch specific carvings only during certain nights. Alignments so precise, They make Stonehenge look like amateur hour. And what did those carvings show? Often women in poses of birth or mid-coitus, with glyphs of water and jaguars surrounding them. You start to realize the sacred and the sensual weren't separate. They were two threads of the same cloth. And now, another intimate story to tuck into. From Foucault's The History of Sexuality, we know that power and sex are tangled beyond unraveling. In Mayan society, this was literal. Nobles kept sexual calendars. They consulted astrologer priests before making love, believing that certain nights increased fertility. Others ensured sons, and a few rare dates, marked with Venus in retrograde and the moon in blood phase, could summon visions or connect lovers in dreams. One famous queen, Lady Yol Iknal, was said to have seduced 3 allies using nothing but her voice, a painted moonstone, and strategic stargazing. She didn't need an army. She had astronomy and cheekbones. When a rival kingdom tried to invade, she used her lovers as spies and turned the tides of war. Was it love, lust, strategy? Who's to say? What's clear is this. Sex and survival were constellations in the same sky. So now you lie there, staring up at the moon, not as a light, but as a mirror. She's not some frozen rock. She's a scandal in slow motion, a survivor of divine melodrama, a symbol of cyclical power. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you think you feel her sadness, or maybe her smirk. The night breathes slower. You're starting to hear it, the heartbeat behind the stars. And it's not steady. It pulses like desire, like grief, like a love you can't quite explain. You dream yourself into a story where the underworld isn't a place you end up after death. It's somewhere you visit midlife, preferably with your twin brother and a flair for drama. The hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, are the rock stars of Mayan myth, and their saga isn't just a tale of revenge, it's a metaphor for transformation, cosmic justice, and oddly enough, flirtation with mortality. You step into their sandals, feel the ground grow colder, and realize you're not descending into hell. You're diving into a place called Xibalba, the place of fright, where every fear is dressed up like a riddle and every shadow is a test. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The twins weren't born to greatness. They were born from spite, sex, and spit. Their father and uncle, also twins, once dared to play ball so loudly it irritated the gods of the underworld. Classic noise complaint. Instead of a fine, the gods summoned them to Xibalba, tricked them with fake handshakes and burning benches, and eventually decapitated them. It wasn't just punishment, it was performance. Death was theatrical, but one of the dead twins left behind a trace. His head hung in a calabash tree like a forbidden fruit. One day, a curious underworld maiden named Exquick wandered too close. The head whispered to her, spit into her palm, and voila, she was pregnant. Historians still argue whether this moment represents a metaphor for spiritual conception or a coded myth about parthenogenesis. But either way, she bore the hero twins alone and raised them away from the bloodthirsty bureaucracy of Xibalba. Fast forward. The twins are clever, mischievous, and outrageously confident. They challenge the lords of death not with swords, but with pranks and wordplay. In one test, they must sit on a burning bench without reacting. They do it, pretending it's perfectly comfortable, like sitting on your ex's couch while ignoring all their emotional baggage. Another time, they're thrown into a house full of jaguars. They feed the beasts bones instead of flesh. And when faced with the house of bats, they hide inside their blowguns, though one of them peeks out too soon and loses his head, which is then used as a ball in the next death match. But don't worry, his brother gets it back and they keep going. You can't help but see a pattern. This isn't just a hero's journey. It's about control, about intimacy with danger. Every trap the twins survive is a seduction of sorts. They flirt with death, dance with it, trick it into thinking it's won. It's not just courage, it's erotic tension. The kind that curls in your gut when you know the stakes are real, but you step forward anyway. Now, take a breath. This isn't just a kid's tale. The Popol Vuh, the Mayan sacred text that tells their story, is laced with undercurrents of sex and transformation. When the twins finally outwit the lords of death, they do so by sacrificing themselves, burning their own bones, and returning as performers, jugglers, magicians, seducers. The lords invite them to a party, fascinated by their tricks. That's when the twins perform their ultimate illusion. They kill one another, bring themselves back to life, and then offer to do the same for the lords. The gods say yes. So the twins kill them, and don't bring them back. It's not just revenge. It's a performance of cosmic dominance. They've turned death into a willing participant in its own undoing. And then, like the best performers, they vanish. One becomes the sun, the other, the moon. And yes, you're right to wonder, after all that mischief, all that myth, which one gets to glow and which one gets to burn? There's a quiet debate among scholars about how much eroticism to read into this story. Some insist it's allegorical, just metaphors for solar and lunar cycles, for harvests and decay. Others point out the language of seduction in the text, the way the twins navigate danger not with brute strength, but with charm, elegance, and intimate understanding. They don't kill the gods of death by force. They win them over, make them vulnerable, and only then strike. It's less battle, more breakup. And it feels weirdly familiar. Let's detour into a historical footnote with bite. According to Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings, in many royal courts, seduction was warfare. A kiss could be a treaty. A night in bed could mean a decade of alliance. There's one case in early Mayan history where a queen, known only by her glyph, translated loosely as "she who laughs under blood moon," used the hero twins' saga as justification to seduce an enemy noble. She invited him to a reenactment of the myth, where he played a death god and she, in full costume, played both twins. The performance ended in bed. A week later, his city surrendered. Performance, seduction, power, echoes of the twins all over again. Now for a fringe tidbit that makes you smile. Some modern oral traditions still retell the hero twins' saga with unexpected humor. In a version recorded in the Guatemalan highlands, the twins are said to argue constantly about women, about who gets to play which role, even about their hairstyles. In one episode, one twin is jealous that the other keeps getting more attention from village girls, and so he swaps their clothes while the other sleeps. Cue chaos, mistaken identity, and a lot of giggling from the storytellers. The Mayans, it turns out, didn't just venerate their heroes. They laughed with them. And if you think all this doesn't tie into sex directly, let's return to the ball game. The sacred game of Pok-to-Pok wasn't just a sport, it was a cosmological act. Players bounced a heavy rubber ball using hips, elbows, and knees, keeping it in motion as if imitating the sun's path across the sky. The twins, remember, are star athletes. The final match in Xibalba is more than a game. It's a ritual of rebirth, a sexual metaphor in motion. The rubber ball becomes a symbol of fertility, of continuity. Winning isn't just triumph, it's climax. And the crowd? They don't just cheer, they witness. They absorb the myth into their bones. You're beginning to see the underworld differently now, not as a dark place of punishment, but as a liminal zone, a womb, a space where transformation happens. The twins go down not to die, but to emerge. Like lovers in a shared dream, like gods whispering beneath the sheets of the cosmos. Sex, myth, and death are not enemies. They are roommates, tangled in ritual, longing, and play. So here you lie again, eyes closed, hearing the rubber ball bounce faintly in your memory. The night wraps around you like a jungle vine. The moon watches, a little amused, a little proud. You've danced with the dead. You've survived the house of bats. And you're only just beginning to understand what intimacy meant to the Mayans. Not a private act, but a myth in motion. A performance so sacred even death wanted a front row seat. You wake with a jolt, as if someone whispered your name through obsidian. Your skin is damp, not from fear, but from humidity, thick with something else. Anticipation. You're standing now in a smoky chamber, heart pounding, staring at a figure who isn't entirely human. She's beautiful, yes, but there's a jaguar tail curling behind her, and in her hand, a thorn-studded cord dripping with fresh blood. Welcome to the moment where ecstasy and agony are indistinguishable, where Mayan bloodletting rituals begin, and no, this isn't the part where you get to look away. The Mayans believed that the gods didn't want your obedience. They wanted your blood, because in your blood was your essence, your soul. And to give it was not self-harm, it was seduction, especially when it came to sex and power. Imagine a queen dressed in crimson and jade, kneeling on woven mats, sliding a stingray spine through her tongue while smoke coils upward, forming visions. Or a king, naked but for a headdress, pressing a sharp obsidian shard into the head of his penis. Not because he's punishing himself, but because he's calling the gods closer. This, to the Mayans, was communication. Not email, not chanting, blood. And the genitals and tongue were not random choices. They were the portals of creation, the liminal spaces between life and expression. Pain wasn't punishment. It was a proposal. You hear the echo of a drumbeat, not from above, but inside you. Your pulse quickens. You realize this isn't history. It's an invitation. Because the Mayans didn't see sex and sacrifice as opposites. They were the same dance, 2 steps in a ritual where the body became a map and the gods were cartographers, drawing meaning with every drop. Historians still argue whether these rituals were exclusively symbolic or physically enacted in every temple ceremony, but the records, murals, and ceremonial tools suggest that bodily sacrifice, especially involving erotic organs, was more common than we'd like to imagine. You feel your thighs tighten as you recall a scene painted on the Bonampak murals. A noble woman calmly running a rope of thorns through her tongue, blood dripping into a bowl, eyes wide open, not in pain, but in trance. And her husband? He stands beside her, erect not with desire but with power. Because through her bloodletting, he connects to the ancestors. Through her willingness, his kingship is reaffirmed. It's not BDSM, it's theology with teeth. Now pause. You're probably asking, were they all just into pain? Was this a culture of masochists? Not quite. Think of it this way. What if pleasure was only meaningful because of what it cost? In a world where gods demanded sacrifice, choosing to bleed was choosing intimacy, not with a lover, with the cosmos. That changes how you see the sweat lodge, doesn't it? Or the bed, or even your own heartbeat? Let's get weirder. There's a fringe record from the Yucatan that describes a secret rite called the tethering of souls, where newly married couples would each prick their tongues and genitals, collect the blood, and mix it with cacao and chili. They'd drink it together before their first night, believing it would bind them in both this life and the next. No pressure. Also, ouch. The beverage was said to cause hallucinations, intense dreams, and a feeling of celestial visitation. One man, decades later, claimed he still dreamt of the moon goddess caressing his face with a snake every time his wife touched his hand. Romantic? Maybe. Disturbing? Definitely. Unforgettable? Absolutely. And now, for the required detour into high drama. From Michel Foucault's The History of Sexuality, we get the idea that societies don't just regulate sex, they ritualize it to control power. And no society ritualized the connection between sex and divine authority quite like the Maya. There's a carved lintel at Yaxchilan that shows Lady Zuk, wife of King Shield Jaguar, performing a bloodletting rite while her husband stands above her. But the focus isn't on him, it's on her. She pulls a barbed rope through her tongue and summons a vision serpent. From the serpent's mouth, a warrior emerges. This is the key. Her pain creates the god. Her blood, her body, opens the channel. She is the portal. That's not submission. That's divine agency. You begin to understand. This wasn't about men using women or women suffering for men. This was about collaboration, about blood as the language of cosmic intimacy. Here's your sex story of the night. In The Erotic Spirit Through History, Peter Webb recounts a curious royal account where a Mayan king, before sleeping with his wife on the night of Venus's return, would undergo a self-inflicted penile bloodletting and then lie down in a bed of red feathers. His queen would do the same with her tongue. They'd lay side by side without touching until dawn, bleeding into shared cloth, believing that if they held back their climax long enough, the gods would gift them a prophet child. This was not about lust. It was about choreography. Time, blood, breath, and faith all moving in sync. Sounds more intense than your last date night, doesn't it? And if you think all this is starting to sound more like performance art than sex education, you're not wrong. Mayan temples were theaters, and every ritual, every bloodletting was a scene. Picture this. A nobleman steps forward in the crowd, takes a flint knife, and slowly, calmly pierces his foreskin. The blood drips onto bark paper, which is then burned. Smoke rises. Everyone watches. In the curling smoke, a god appears, or an ancestor, or a vision of the future. The crowd gasps. The man faints, or maybe just bows. Either way, the act is done. He doesn't need applause. He's not the actor. He's the script. Now for tonight's quirky gem. In some villages, it was believed that couples who shared too much pleasure without offering something to the gods, be it food, blood, or vows, would be haunted by a spirit called Ixtsutsui, the watcher of the unfulfilled. She wasn't evil, just disappointed. Her presence was marked by sudden chills during lovemaking, or strange whispers only one partner could hear. She'd linger until a sacrifice was made. Could be a chicken. Could be a strand of hair burned by moonlight. Either way, sex was never just sex. It was a deal. And the blood? It wasn't waste, it was currency. A transaction with the sacred. You imagine the weight of that. What if every kiss came with a tax? Every climax required an offering? Would you love differently? Would you mean it more? That was the Mayan way. Intimacy laced with consequence, with meaning, with the echo of gods in every touch. Now you're back in the chamber. The smoke has thickened. The drumbeat is slower now. Not the rhythm of war, but of devotion. You see shadows of lovers kneeling. You hear whispers of names, old names, ones not spoken for centuries. You feel the thrum of power that doesn't come from above, but from within. The body is not a temple, it's a codex, and blood is the ink. You close your eyes and exhale, not from fear, from reverence. Because tonight, you didn't just learn about Mayan bloodletting, you felt it. The intimacy, the offering, the trembling line between pain and passion. And somewhere the gods are watching, not with judgment, with curiosity, maybe even with love. You're not alone in the dark tonight. There's a bright, unblinking eye hovering just above the horizon. Venus. But don't call it a morning star unless you want a deity to roll their celestial eyes at you. This isn't just a planet, it's a player. The Mayans didn't just track Venus, they were obsessed. They mapped every appearance, every disappearance, every wink and retreat across the sky. To them, Venus wasn't a ball of gas or a rock on fire. It was a dangerous seducer, a cosmic agent of disruption. And yes, Occasionally, a really bad influence on your sex life. Right now, Venus is rising just before dawn, throwing its silvery brilliance into the jungle like a divine flirtation. And you can almost hear it whispering, "Want to start something?" Venus's cycle is seductive in its very structure. It vanishes for 8 days, reappears as the morning star, then gradually brightens, before disappearing again and returning as the evening star. To the Mayans, this wasn't astronomy. This was performance art, a celestial striptease. And they timed everything around it. Wars, royal ascensions, sacrifices, and yes, romantic liaisons. There's a scene carved on a stela from Copan where a queen prepares for a ritual under Venus's rise. She's not wearing much, just beads, feathers, and that unfakeable look of cosmic focus. Next to her, a scribe records the date with precise glyphs, not just the day, but the position of Venus. Because if you seduced the king under the wrong Venus phase, bad things happened. Miscarriages, storms, political coups, but get it right? The gods smiled. The crops grew. Your child might be born with star blood, which sounds amazing unless you hate pressure. Now here's where things get flirty. Venus was associated with Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, a god both male and not male, both divine and wrathful. When Venus appeared, Kukulkan was said to descend to Earth, bringing storms, visions, and erotic dreams. Some Mayan nobles kept journals of these dreams, recorded in pictoglyphs. One famously describes a man dreaming of a feathered serpent slithering around his waist and whispering secrets into his navel. The next morning he awoke with a prophecy in his mouth and a child on the way. How's that for a one-night stand? Historians still argue whether these stories reflect real dreams interpreted through ritual practice or were invented to justify unexpected pregnancies. But the themes are clear. Venus was both lover and omen. And love? Always a little bit dangerous. Let's pivot to a wild detail from Sex with Kings. In the courts of post-classic Maya, it was common for rulers to schedule intimate encounters based on Venus's exact visibility. One queen, known in records as Lady of the Thorned Star, insisted her lovers wear serpent belts during the act, said to invoke Kukulkan's energy. Her chambers were painted with celestial glyphs, and during key Venus transits, she would engage in what was called star weaving, a ritual where her moans were believed to echo the movements of planets. A bit theatrical? Yes. Effective? Definitely. Her dynasty lasted longer than most. But Venus wasn't always a welcome visitor. The Mayans viewed its heliacal rising, that is, its reappearance just before sunrise, as a bad omen. Kings prepared defensive rituals. They burned incense, they canceled risky ventures, and they often abstained from sex, fearing Venus's wrath might infect their lineage. Abstinence as divine insurance policy. And yet, some didn't resist. There's a stele showing a young priestess dancing naked before a Venus altar, surrounded by serpents and storm symbols. Her story is unknown, but scholars suggest she might have been a Venus devotee who believed surrendering to the planet's energy meant gaining prophecy. Or maybe she just liked taking risks. Now for a quirky twist, Venus had a twin in Mayan cosmology. Not a real twin, an energetic echo. Some priests believed that Venus's light cast shadows that could impregnate women. During certain phases, women were told not to sleep alone beneath open windows or bathe at dawn. One tale from the Highlands describes a girl who claimed she was kissed by starlight and later bore twins with eyes that never blinked. The village didn't shun her. They built a shrine. Because in Mayan logic, divinity wasn't always chosen. It sometimes just showed up, late at night, wearing nothing but light. Let's talk about the Venus table of the Dresden Codex. This ancient Mayan manuscript is basically a planetary sex calendar. It tracks Venus's movements down to the day and is filled with warnings, blessings, and odd little glyphs that combine warfare with fertility. You look closely at the illustrations, figures with exaggerated genitalia, bound captives, serpents entwined with flowers. It's not porn. It's prophecy. Because to the Mayans, Venus didn't just govern the sky. It governed the body. When Venus was bright, your body pulsed differently. Lovers kissed harder, fights escalated, fertility soared or plummeted, depending on how well you'd pleased the gods. Here's tonight's sex story. In one preserved record from the site of Uxmal, a noblewoman named Ixyol dates her pregnancy to a specific Venus phase. She claimed her lover, a court astronomer, refused to lie with her until Venus reached its maximum elongation in the morning sky. On that night, they met in a moonlit chamber adorned with obsidian mirrors. They recited celestial glyphs, drank cacao laced with passion flower and tobacco, and made love while Venus shone directly through a carved slit in the temple roof. 9 months later, her son was born during a total eclipse. He became a warrior priest, or a madman. The records aren't clear, but what's clear is the belief. Time, stars, and love were a three-headed deity, and to touch one, you had to bow to all. And now, something to chew on. Some Mayan astrologers believed that Venus was watching. Not metaphorically, literally watching. They believed Venus had a sentient gaze, and that to ignore it during key moments, sex, ritual, war, was to invite blindness, figurative or actual. One tragic tale tells of a sculptor who carved love scenes on a temple wall during Venus's occultation. Days later, he went blind. The community said it wasn't punishment. It was perspective. Now he could see with his inner eye. Later, he became a dream interpreter. You wonder, if a planet could see your love life, what would it report? A drama? A comedy? Or just static? So here you are, lying beneath Venus's gaze. She's burning bright tonight. Too bright. You feel it in your chest, that strange pull, like someone remembering your name from another life. You wonder if the person you desire is also looking up, feeling the same gravity, because that's what Venus does. She doesn't just shine, she stirs, she meddles. She makes you think about who you've loved, who you've hurt, and who you still ache for. The jungle is still now. Even the insects seem to be watching. And you? You're wondering if your dreams tonight will be your own? Or if Venus might have a cameo, whispering something into your sleep, bright and cruel and beautiful as only a star can be. Something's moving through the trees. Not a breeze, not an animal, but a presence. You feel it in your ribs, like a vibration just under the skin. You squint into the darkness, and then you see them. Glowing eyes, low to the ground, stalking with purpose. Jaguars. Not just one, but many. You freeze, not from fear, but awe. In the Mayan world, jaguars weren't predators. They were portals. Shapeshifters, symbols of both the underworld and raw, untamed passion. You remember the glyph for night sun, a jaguar with a flaming back crossing through the underworld sky. This isn't just a jungle cat. This is the embodiment of celestial lust, divine mystery, and power that purrs before it pounces. Now imagine, a priestess covered in jaguar pelts, dancing barefoot under a waxing moon. Her body moves with controlled ferocity, hips circling like a predator before the kill. Around her, drums echo the heartbeat of the forest. She isn't just performing. She's becoming. Mayan rituals often called on the power of animals, not just totems, but literal embodiments. To channel the jaguar was to awaken your sensual core, your instincts, your ability to seduce and to dominate. And unlike the cold gods of Olympus or the abstract deities of later empires, the jaguar deities of the Maya were intimate. They breathed down your neck. They joined you in dreams. They demanded physical tribute, and sometimes physical company. Take the jaguar god of the underworld, sometimes known as God El. He's depicted lounging in elaborate headdresses, smoking cigars, often surrounded by voluptuous women. Think less savage beast and more celestial playboy. He ruled wealth, trade, and sex. He wasn't feared, he was envied. His temples had chambers painted with erotic scenes, couples intertwined with jaguar spots patterned across their backs, feline tails curling around limbs, claws gently grazing thighs. He was the archetype of seduction with teeth, smooth, powerful, and dangerous if underestimated. And people didn't just worship him, they aspired to him. Historians still argue whether the worship of jaguar deities was meant to channel literal animal spirits, or whether these figures symbolized qualities Mayan people sought in intimate relationships. Strength, elegance, loyalty, but also mystery, independence, and an ability to disappear and return, always on their own terms. Sound like anyone you've dated? Probably. Jaguars didn't beg. They watched. And when they moved for no one but themselves. You might be wondering, what role did this energy play in real relationships? Let's wander into a royal bedroom in Palenque around the year 710 CE. A queen, Lady Tzakbu, prepares for a ceremonial night with her husband, Pakal the Great. She's painted in ochre and black, her limbs dusted with crushed mica so she glitters in the torchlight. Around her neck, jaguar teeth dangle like trophies. A priest has just finished reading the stars and confirmed the signs. This night, Venus is high, the moon is full, and a jaguar constellation rules the eastern sky. It's perfect. They lie together not in secrecy, but in spectacle. Outside, scribes mark the moment. Not the act, never the act, but the intention. This union is cosmic. Their intimacy is performance. And Lady Tzakbu is no passive bride. She chose this. She invoked the jaguar. She whispered her prayers to the god with the cigar and the low growl. Let's deepen the intrigue. In The Erotic Spirit Through History, Peter Webb writes of a Mayan sculpture found near the Usumacinta River. It shows two lovers, mid-embrace, their bodies wrapped in serpentine curves. At their feet, two jaguar cubs, playfully entwined. Some archaeologists suggest it depicts divine lovers, possibly twins, possibly a queen and her divine consort. But others argue it's a funerary piece, representing not sex but union beyond death. Because to the Mayans, intimacy wasn't confined to the body. It echoed through time, through lifetimes. Love could outlast flesh, and the jaguar, walking between worlds, was the escort. Now for tonight's quirky curiosity. Some jungle villages believed that jaguar sightings during courtship were omens. If a couple saw a jaguar while walking together, it meant their relationship would either burn with passion or collapse under its own weight. No middle ground. Some even carried jaguar bones in pouches, believing they enhanced sexual prowess. In one 16th century missionary report, clearly written with clenched teeth, a friar complains that young Mayan men whisper jaguar dreams to maidens and think themselves gods. You chuckle. That's not arrogance. That's tradition. Let's talk masks. In Mayan festivals, men and women often wore jaguar masks during fertility dances, not to hide, but to become. The dances were slow, deliberate. Each movement mimicked a stalk, a pounce, a wrestle. The point wasn't choreography, it was invocation. At the dance's peak, couples would lock eyes and sometimes disappear together into the jungle. Some returned married, some didn't return until dawn. The line between theater and reality blurred. The mask became the face, the role became the truth. And in the heart of that sweaty jungle, with stars peeking through the leaves, love, wild, feral, and frightening, was made. Now, a tale from Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings. There's mention of a ruler in the Maya highlands who kept a chamber adorned with jaguar pelts and obsidian mirrors. Before choosing a lover, he'd make them enter the room alone, stand under moonlight, and describe a dream involving a jaguar. If the dream was vivid, full of fire, pursuit, or union, he'd consider them worthy. If they hesitated, rejected. Because in his mind, those who feared the jaguar feared their own desire. And what good is a partner afraid of the wild? So here you are again, lying in the jungle, the stars above you forming not polite constellations, but sprawling spotted patterns. You hear a growl. It might be real. Might be memory. You don't flinch. You smile. Because now you understand. The jaguar isn't a threat. It's a mirror. It shows you the parts of yourself you pretend aren't there. The hunger. The mystery. The need to touch and not be tamed. You remember the temples, the queens, the masks, the myths. You realize intimacy wasn't private in the Mayan world. It was sacred theater. A performance where your desire didn't make you sinful. It made you divine. And as the night deepens and you slip closer to sleep, you feel the jungle breathing with you. The air grows heavier, not with fear, but with promise. Because the jaguar never really leaves. It watches from the edge. It waits for the moment when you're ready to move. Not like a human, but like something older, wilder, and real. You're chewing something now, something sweet, warm, and a little gritty. Corn. Not the fluffy yellow kind from supermarket freezers, but the sacred kind, hand ground on a stone slab, whispered over by elders, offered to gods before being eaten by mortals. And as you chew, you feel it shift on your tongue. Not just food, but memory, myth, desire. To the Maya, maize wasn't just sustenance. It was ancestry, body, divinity. The maize god himself, young, beautiful, often shown with flowing hair like ripe corn silk, was both creator and seducer. And his life? A mess of sex, death, resurrection, and performance art so dramatic it would put any modern soap opera to shame. You picture him now, rising from the underworld like a dancer emerging from water, glistening, reborn from the cracked shell of the earth. But this isn't some dry agricultural metaphor. This is intimacy at its most mythic. The maize god wasn't just farm fresh and innocent. He was pursued, consumed, flirted with by celestial maidens, and occasionally swallowed whole by the very forces he helped sustain. Talk about complicated relationships. Imagine this. In the underworld, the maize god is trapped, not by chains, but by desire. The earth wants him, clings to him. The goddesses of death court him with flowers and soft riddles. They offer him drink, touch his face, try to seduce him into forgetting the sun. In some versions of the myth, he resists. In others, he gives in. And from that intimacy, the seeds of new worlds are sown. Historians still argue whether these versions reflect regional agricultural cycles or deeper philosophical tensions between pleasure and duty. But either way, the theme is clear. Fertility isn't sterile. It's messy. It's passionate. It's rooted in longing. Let's shift the scene. In the daylight world, peasants plant corn during certain celestial alignments, especially when the maize god is said to rise in the sky. Women sing to the seeds, whispering prayers that sound suspiciously like lullabies. Men press the kernels into the soil with thumbs blessed in rituals. And before any harvest is eaten, a portion is offered, often in intimate ceremonies that mimic the god's mythic rebirth. There's a record from the highlands where villagers acted out the maize god's escape from the underworld, using dancers wrapped in green silk and dusted in golden pollen. At the climax, the lead dancer would fall into a ceremonial pit, then emerge nude and laughing, smeared with wet clay. A fertility rite? Sure. But also a cosmic striptease. Because birth and rebirth weren't just events. They were performances. Now chew this. The Maya believed that humans were made from maize. After the gods failed to make humanity from mud, too soft, and wood, no soul, they tried ground corn mixed with water and blood. And it worked. So, when you eat corn, you're eating yourself, or your ancestors, or your future lover, depending on your interpretation. No pressure. But that does make dinner a little more intense, doesn't it? Let's season the pot with a fringe tidbit. In some regions, couples were encouraged to consummate marriages in maize fields, ideally during the full moon. Why? Because corn listened. It absorbed intention. The stalks were believed to vibrate with emotion. Lovemaking in their presence blessed the relationship, but only if it was consensual, timed to the lunar cycle, and accompanied by offerings. Sometimes flowers, sometimes a blood drop, sometimes a shared drink of fermented corn mash called balshay. One missionary's diary complains bitterly about young lovers rolling among the maize with laughter and sin. But the villagers? They saw blessings in every rustle. You want a human story? Here's one from Sex with Kings. A nobleman in the city of Tikal once seduced 3 sisters by claiming to embody the maize god. He dressed in green feathers, painted his skin gold, and recited portions of the Popol Vuh in a low, throaty voice. The sisters, all priestesses, knew he was lying, but they played along. Each gave him a kernel of corn as a symbol of intimacy. Later, during a royal festival, they performed a dance in his honor, and he fainted from heat and pride. 9 months later, one of them gave birth to a boy with unusual markings, a spiral glyph across his chest. He grew up to become a priest, or a poet. The records disagree, but his nickname? Child of the Colonel. Let's get more academic. Peter Webb, in The Erotic Spirit Through History, suggests that agricultural societies often sexualized crop deities as a way to encode anxieties around survival. In Maya cosmology, that anxiety wasn't repressed, it was ritualized. Every failed crop was seen not just as bad luck, but as a failed seduction. The gods had not been pleased. The ritual dances hadn't moved them. The blood had not been hot enough. That urgency, the hunger not just for food but for divine approval, fed into everything, even courtship, even marriage, even solo prayer. Desire wasn't a side dish. It was the main course. Let's add spice. During harvest festivals, it was common for unmarried youths to dress as the maize god and his consorts. They'd reenact his captivity, escape, and eventual union with the sky. The final act? A symbolic marriage, often accompanied by actual engagements, kisses stolen behind temple walls, and the quiet crunch of corn husks stepped on in the dark. The air was thick with balshay, pollen, and perfume. The stars aligned, and in the silence that followed, you could almost hear the maize god sigh, reborn again, not in myth, but in mouths and hearts and the sticky echoes of devotion. And now, your quirky detail. In one village, maize dolls were created with human hair and clothed in bits of real skin, shavings from ritual cuts. These dolls were fed with drops of water and kissed during droughts. If the rain came, the dolls were buried with thanks. If it didn't, they were burned. And if that doesn't make you rethink your own household rituals, I don't know what will. You return to your bite of corn. It tastes different now, not just because of the story, but because of what it carries. In every kernel, there's a whisper of the maize god's seduction, a record of his escape from darkness, his union with the heavens, his death and rebirth. The corn isn't passive, it's erotic. It remembers the press of feet on soil, the moans under the moon, the hands that planted it with trembling hope. The jungle around you grows quieter, not still, never still, but softened. You lie back, hand on your belly, heartbeat syncing with something old. You're not just eating. You're communing with gods, with myths, with a people who believed that intimacy wasn't something whispered in the dark. It was something planted in the open, watered with blood and sweat and joy. And somewhere beneath the soil, the maze god shifts, smiles, waits. You hear it before you see it, a heavy thump, rhythmic and low, echoing through stone corridors and into the dirt under your spine. You're seated now, courtside at one of the oldest stadiums in history. But there's no popcorn, no jerseys, just sweat-slick skin and a deafening sense that something bigger than sport is happening here. The sacred Mayan ball game, Pak to Pak, isn't a match. It's foreplay. It's warfare. It's myth reenacted through motion. And tonight, under a sky humming with celestial tension, it becomes a ritual of flirtation, cosmic, dangerous, and designed to seduce both gods and fate. The players, young men with sinewy arms and ritual tattoos, don't smile. They wear thick padded belts around their waists, adorned with glyphs that shimmer in torchlight. The rubber ball, dense, hard, unforgiving, is the size of a human head. And no, that's not an accident. You watch it soar across the court, rebounding off hips, elbows, thighs. Never hands, never feet. The rules are brutal, and the stakes, even worse. Because sometimes the losers died, but in some myths, so did the winners. Why? Because the best were worthy. To lose meant humiliation. To win might mean ascension or sacrifice. Either way, the gods were entertained. But here's where it turns intimate. The court isn't just a game space. It's a cosmic stage. The ball isn't just a ball. It's the sun, or the moon, or a testicle, depending on the glyph. The players are not athletes. They're actors in a ritual designed to mirror the eternal chase between light and darkness, life and death, male and female, desire and denial. The movements are precise, sensual. One player leans low, hips flexing to absorb the bounce. Another twists mid-air, body arched in a way that would make gymnasts jealous. You realize you're not watching a sport. You're watching erotic mythology in motion. In some regions, young couples attended ball games not just for entertainment, but as part of courtship. Certain victories, especially during Venus alignments, were seen as sexual omens. If your team won during a Venus rise, it was said you'd find passion within the month. If they lost, abstinence was advised. Entire flings rose and fell on a lucky rebound. One tale even tells of a noblewoman who married a ball player because the sun shone directly onto his back during a winning dive. She called it a celestial signal. Her father called it impulsive. But her son became a high priest, so everyone shut up. Let's zoom into myth again. The hero twins, Hunahpu and Expalanque, played ball not for sport, but to taunt the gods of death. Their skills were so impressive that even the lords of Xibalba stopped torturing people just to watch. The twins used charm, style, and a hint of erotic rebellion. One myth even suggests they flirted with a death goddess mid-game, distracting her long enough to score the winning shot. Were they lovers? Tricksters? Performers? Historians still argue whether these tales are literal, symbolic, or both. But one thing is certain. Their play wasn't just athletic, it was seductive. And now your fringe curiosity. Some Mayan lovers, especially those too young to marry, used private ball games as an excuse to meet. A small ball, a cleared patch of dirt, and the understanding that whoever won got a kiss. In certain festivals, young women placed wagers, jewelry, ribbons, or whispered secrets, to be claimed only if their chosen player scored a point. The stakes were emotional, the prizes intimate. And somewhere in all that dust and motion, young hearts learned the push-pull rhythm that would shape their adult rituals. Here's tonight's tale from Sex with Kings. In the kingdom of Calakmul, there was once a prince obsessed with the ball game, not just as sport, but as performance. He trained for years, perfecting his hip flicks and shoulder hits until his form was considered divine. One night, During a lunar eclipse, he played a ceremonial match in front of foreign envoys. When he scored the final point, a high-ranking priestess stood, removed her headdress, and threw a red sash onto the court. It landed at his feet. No words were spoken. But the next day they were wed in a moonlit ceremony, their union blessed by a dream of the hero twins and a celestial snake. They ruled together for decades, initiating a golden age. Coincidence? Not according to the scribes. Now here's something even Foucault would smirk at. In The History of Sexuality, he argues that societies often encode power within public performances, and few performances were as charged as the ball game. To dominate the court was to dominate time, space, and cosmic order. Some courts were shaped like vulvas, others like serpents. Players often entered through symbolic wombs and emerged victorious through mouths of gods. When you played well, you weren't just strong. You were fertile. You were desirable. You were worthy. And if the crowd gasped when you jumped, if the gods smiled when you scored, who cared if you bled after? And yes, blood was part of it. Sometimes players performed ritual bloodletting before matches, smearing the ball with sacred fluid. It wasn't superstition. It was theater. They were offering themselves, erotically and spiritually, to the universe. And sometimes they played nude, not out of exhibitionism, but to emphasize vulnerability, purity, and the merging of body with myth. You start to wonder if modern sports could ever reclaim that sacred sensuality, that blend of sweat, skin, and story. Let's bring it back to the crowd. Imagine a couple, seated together, wrapped in woven shawls, watching the match unfold. The woman traces a spiral on her lover's arm each time the ball soars. The man counts her breaths, syncing them with the player's movements. They kiss when Venus emerges behind the court wall. They hold hands tighter when the ball stops mid-air, defying gravity for just a second. This isn't passive watching. It's communion. Ball game as courtship. Courtship as cosmic echo. And now, your quirky gem of the night. In some villages, a young man could request a bride by performing a perfect ball trick in front of her house, spinning the rubber orb off his hip, over his shoulder, and into a ceremonial ring carved above the door. If he missed, she could mock him for a week. If he succeeded, her family owed him dinner. And if she laughed instead of frowning, well, the wedding was already halfway done. So now you sit, heart racing as the final point is scored. The crowd roars, the stars shimmer. The rubber ball lies still, but the air crackles with myth. You feel something shift in your chest. Maybe it's arousal, maybe it's awe, or maybe it's the realization that desire isn't always soft. Sometimes it's athletic, sweaty, public. A challenge hurled across stone and shadow, answered not with words but with movement, with rhythm, with risk. And as you rise to leave, the ball bounces once, twice. You look back. No one's touching it. The game, it seems, never really ends. You blink, and time folds inward like a jaguar's leap. Everything is spinning. Your heart, the stars, even your thoughts, as you suddenly find yourself face to face with the one thing more seductive than a lover's gaze, a Mayan calendar. Not the kind on your aunt's fridge with puppies and bank holidays, but a stone disc so precise, so charged with meaning, that it could predict eclipses, inspire bloodletting, and schedule your wedding night. This isn't a calendar, it's a cosmic flirtation device. And tonight, you're going to learn how the Maya scheduled desire, choreographed conception, and kept time with the erotic pulse of the universe. Welcome to the Tzolk'in, the sacred 260-day cycle that wasn't just used for naming children and scheduling harvests. It was used for everything, especially sex. Imagine this. Two lovers seated in front of a priest, not to get married, but to get timed. The priest is old, his fingers stained with ink, his eyes clouded with years of stargazing. Before he gives his blessing, he checks the couple's compatibility using their Tzolk'in birth dates. One is born under Akbal, darkness, mystery, dawn potential. The other under Ka'an, desire, fertility, sun-ripened beauty. He nods slowly. Good match. When asked when they should sleep together for the first time, he doesn't hesitate. He flips through a codex made of bark, touches a glyph shaped like a spiral entwined with dripping flowers, and murmurs, "Day of Ix." That's the day when female energy is most powerful, when the moon rises early and the jaguar goddess paces restlessly across the sky. That night, their union is said to echo through time. Not romantic enough for you? Then you've never made love on a schedule blessed by the stars. And this wasn't just for nobles. Even farmers consulted timekeepers before intimacy. They believed children conceived on unlucky days might be born cursed, or worse, dull. Conception wasn't left to chance. It was aligned with planetary rhythms, solar phases, even the position of the Milky Way, known as the White Road that spirits travel on. Historians still argue whether these practices were universally enforced or reserved for elites, but the pattern remains. Love was regulated, not by shame, but by sky. If your relationship was off balance, they didn't blame communication. They blamed your calendar math. Let's slide into something silkier. The Mayan calendar doesn't just mark time, it embodies it. Each day has a personality. Some are playful, others serious, a few dangerously seductive. One day might favor physical pleasure, another deep emotional bonding, a third fasting and reflection. You start to see the rhythm. It's not just time, it's mood. And if you think this is overkill, consider this. Modern couples consult horoscopes, lunar cycles, even Spotify mood playlists before dates. The Maya just did it with better math and less Wi-Fi. Let's go deeper. During certain calendar cycles, specifically when Venus rose with a waxing moon and the day carried a dual-gender glyph, temples would host public matchmaking rituals. Picture it. A courtyard lit by fire, unmarried youths wearing symbolic animal skins, dancing in slow spirals around each other. At a signal, they'd pair off, not permanently, but for exploration. These temporary unions weren't sinful. They were sacred. If connection sparked, the priest would record their names and birth dates. If not, they bowed, thanked each other, and returned to the circle. No swipe needed, just rhythm, eye contact, and trust in the stars. Here's your wild tidbit for the night. In some temples, there were erotic calendars carved directly into the walls. Each glyph was paired with a suggested offering: chili for passion, honey for sweetness, feathers for tenderness. Couples would touch the day glyph that matched their birth and then kiss beneath it. If their glyphs aligned in shape or number, it was said their union would bring good dreams and fertile soil. If not, they were encouraged to wait or to fast and try again. You wonder, what would our relationships look like if we all took just one night a month to consult the sky before each other? Now for your story, straight from Sex with Kings. There was a queen, Ix-chan Balam, who famously refused to share her bed with any man unless his birth glyph matched her own in a 5-day harmony cycle. Many tried, some begged, one even forged his glyph. She saw through it. When she finally found a partner whose glyph matched hers and fell on a Venus-ruled day, they celebrated by bathing in a sacred cenote and spending 3 days in ritual lovemaking under the guidance of temple midwives. She gave birth to twins, both said to be born during a triple Venus conjunction. Their fates were sealed. One became a ruler, the other a seer. Love wasn't a gamble. It was mathematics with body heat. Let's talk about taboo. Not every day was made for sex. Some were days of silence, abstinence, reflection. To disobey those days risked spiritual imbalance. One codex warns that couples who ignore sleeping days might suffer vivid nightmares, disoriented children, or divine disapproval. In one village, a couple reportedly conceived on such a forbidden day. Their son was born with 2 cowlicks and eyes that never focused. He wandered the hills, speaking to insects and mimicking bird cries. Some said he was cursed. Others said he was touched by the gods. He later became a renowned herbalist. Make of that what you will. Now, let's get sensual. Certain calendar days were associated with bodily regions. The day of Bean ruled the thighs. The day of Ix ruled the genitals. The day of Chikchan ruled breath and voice. Lovers sometimes inked these glyphs onto each other's skin using plant dye, then kissed the matching body part before intimacy. It was a game, a ritual, a blessing. A way to turn the body into a living codex. Each kiss a reading, each sigh a prayer. Suddenly, foreplay isn't just physical, it's theological. For Foucault fans in the back, yes, this is discipline wrapped in seduction. But it's also liberation. The calendar didn't repress love. It gave it structure, rhythm, a cosmic backdrop. Love wasn't messy. It was symphonic. And the sheet music? Etched in stone, soaked in starlight, waiting to be read by anyone brave enough to align their heart with a glyph. So now you're lying there under a moon that's not quite full, listening to the soft whisper of leaves and wondering what day it is. You remember your birth glyph. You start imagining your lovers. You picture the symbols intertwining, not in pixels, but in starlight. The calendar, it turns out, doesn't just tell you when to wake or plant or bleed. It tells you when to want, when to touch, when to trust. And you realize, with a soft sigh, that maybe your ancestors weren't obsessed with time. Maybe they just didn't want to miss the moment when love and sky and story finally aligned. You're watching the sky now. Not for stars, but for something slithering. Not a meteor, not a cloud, but a serpent made of light. Its body coils through constellations, mouth open, eyes glittering like obsidian. This is no dream. This is the vision serpent, the celestial python of Mayan myth that carries messages, gods, and sometimes lovers between realms. And tonight, it's dancing. Slow, hypnotic, dangerous. In Mayan mythology, this serpent isn't just a divine messenger. It's the runway model of the sky, beautiful, feared, and entirely aware of the effect it has on those watching. It slides between stars with a rhythm that feels too fluid, too knowing to be coincidence. This is not an animal. This is sex with scales. This is weather with hips. And the Maya? They saw that too. Because when it came to the heavens, they didn't just observe. They interpreted, choreographed, participated. The gods didn't move without meaning. And if the sky serpent writhed, it wasn't for fun. It was for communication, prophecy, and yes, cosmic intimacy. Let's begin with the basic visual. On temple lintels, the vision serpent often appears erupting from the forehead or mouth of a ruler or priestess mid-ritual. And from the serpent's mouth, a god emerges. This is crucial. The serpent isn't just a channel. It's a birthing passage, an erotic corridor between worlds. To call forth the vision serpent, the ritualist would engage in fasting, dancing, and bloodletting, often from the tongue, sometimes the penis, always intentional. The blood, caught on bark, would be burned, and the smoke, coiling like the serpent, would rise into the heavens. That smoke, that was the signal. That was the summoning. The sky serpent would come down to meet them, bringing dreams, visions, commands, or just a gentle curl around the soul to remind you, you are seen. Imagine it now, a queen kneeling in a temple at midnight, stone cool beneath her knees, blood dripping into a bowl beside her. Her attendants step back. She closes her eyes, breathes deep, and as the copal smoke rises, the stars blur. A hiss, soft but unmistakable. The serpent is here. She speaks, not aloud, but with her body, her pain, her need. The serpent listens. It slithers through her thoughts. And then, from its mouth, a lover's face emerges. Not dead, not divine, just present, watching her, needing nothing but her awareness. This is not a hallucination. It's contact. Historians still argue whether the vision serpent was seen literally in ritual or symbolically through trance and performance, but most agree it was central to Mayan spiritual erotics. Because unlike Western dichotomies, the Maya didn't divide the sacred from the sensual. If a serpent wanted to touch your mind, it used your body, and if your body wanted to meet the stars, it bled a little to make room. Now let's get sultry. In some highland villages, young lovers invoked the vision serpent during their first night together. Not by bleeding, but by whispering its name 3 times while locked in an embrace. They believed the serpent would coil invisibly around their bed, ensuring no lie could pass between them. If the couple was true, mutual, open, ready, the serpent would hiss once and vanish. If not, one lover might wake with a dream of drowning. A warning. Don't pretend with a creature that lives in smoke. Let's swirl in a little kink. In The Erotic Spirit Through History, Peter Webb recounts artifacts of serpent-bonded headdresses, worn not for fashion but for play. One such ritual involved 2 partners, one embodying the serpent, the other the seer. The serpent would slither, unseen, around the room, trailing feathers or ropes across skin. The seer would lie still, eyes closed, receptive. When the serpent touched the seer's mouth, the ritual was complete. They'd switch roles. Sometimes this was for pleasure, other times prophecy, and sometimes both. You realize now, the serpent wasn't just celestial. It was personal. It moved between people the same way it moved between stars, with grace, with heat, with inevitability. Now your required tale from Sex with Kings. One Maya queen, Lady Chakchel, was known for summoning the vision serpent before every major decision. But her most famous encounter came not during war or childbirth, but during heartbreak. Her consort, a famed astronomer, died suddenly during an eclipse. That night, she bled in silence, burned her offerings, and called the serpent. What emerged? Not her lover, but a younger version of herself, laughing, dancing, free. She interpreted the vision not as nostalgia, but instruction. She announced that she would rule alone, without remarriage, guided only by dreams and stars. Her people called her the Widow Serpent. Her enemies called her unpredictable. Her reign lasted 27 years. Fringe fact time. In certain calendar alignments, especially during the Wayebi days, the 5 danger days at the end of the year, it was believed that the vision serpent would appear in pools of water, not as a full image, but as ripples that moved against the wind. Children were warned not to touch those ripples. Lovers, however, sought them. Some bathed together in cenotes at dawn, hoping the serpent would bless their bond. And if the water stilled after they entered, a good omen. If it frothed, walk away. Fast. Here's something Foucault would savor. The vision serpent as surveillance. Not punitive, but intimate. A presence that knew when you lied to yourself, when you touched without feeling, when you yearned without voice. Some priests taught that the serpent didn't need smoke to appear, it only needed vulnerability. So to invoke it wasn't a spell, it was a surrender. To truth, to sensation, to whatever rose when you stopped pretending. And yes, of course, the serpent had gender. Or didn't. Depending on the day, the myth, the phase of Venus. Some depictions show it with breasts, others with a phallus, some with neither. It didn't matter. What mattered was movement, energy, the curve, the hiss, the invitation, to follow, to open, to be reborn, not through fire, but through skin. Let's not forget the practical lovers. In village life, serpent motifs adorned beds, mats, even personal jewelry. Some rings carved with coiled serpents were passed between betrothed couples, not as property, but as mutual vows. "We carry the serpent," the saying went. "We share the shedding." Intimacy wasn't about permanence. It was about transformation. To love was to molt. To trust the other would still want you after your skin changed. And now you lie there, in the warmth of your bed or your memory, listening for a hiss that's not a threat, but a promise. The night curls around you like smoke. You feel the air shift, not cold, just aware. The serpent, if it comes, won't shout. It will slither. It will sigh. And if you're brave, if you're ready, it might whisper something true into the hollow of your bones. You don't flinch. You breathe. Because now, finally, you understand. In the Mayan cosmos, intimacy was a serpent, twisting through dream and body, mouth and mind, asking only that you stop resisting and start listening. You're standing in the rain, barefoot on temple stone, staring at the mouth of a cave that isn't really a cave. It's a womb, a cosmic cavity, a place where the divine isn't born clean or sterile, but messy, slippery, and dripping with myth. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of wet earth and something older, something like blood and moonlight. And just beyond the curve of shadow, you see them. Two figures, barely visible but unmistakable in form, divine twins, curled in fetal defiance, gestating not in peace, but in scandal. This is not your average birth story. This is the origin of Hunahpu and Xbalanque, the hero twins. And tonight, you're going to hear how they were conceived, not through love, not even through lust, but through spit. Yes, spit. Mayan myth doesn't shy away from strange origins, and this one? It's a masterclass in erotic mysticism, gender fluidity, and the divine chaos that always seems to accompany new life. Let's rewind. Their father, Hunahpu, was already dead. His head hung in a calabash tree in the underworld, punished for playing ball too loudly near the lords of Xibalba. His skull, now fused with the tree, wasn't idle. It whispered. It watched. And when Exquick, a curious young maiden and daughter of an underworld lord, approached, he spoke to her, not with threats, but with riddles and flirtation. In one version of the tale, he asked her to hold out her hand. Then he spat into it. And that spit? That was it. Conception. Instant. Immaculate? Maybe. Scandalous? Absolutely. Historians still argue whether this act was symbolic of spiritual transmission or a veiled reference to ancient insemination rites. But either way, Exquick became pregnant, alone, and unwed, in a realm where pregnancy outside marriage was punishable by death. Her father, outraged, ordered her execution. But the executioners, moved by her serenity, or perhaps by divine fear, faked her death and let her flee to the surface world. There, she gave birth to the twins in secrecy, raising them in the wilderness, surrounded not by midwives or courts, but by trees, rivers, and stories. And you? You're beginning to realize that Mayan myths don't wrap intimacy in comfort. They wrap it in resistance, in risk, in rebellion against the expected. But let's linger on the moment of conception. Spit isn't just bodily fluid. It's communication. It's the essence of speech, of breath, of prayer. To spit into someone's hand in this context is to give them your story, your memory, your lineage. It's raw, intimate, messy in a way that can't be polished. And the mouth? The Mayans saw it as a gate, not just for food, but for creation. When you speak, you birth sound. When you kiss, you exchange soul. So to be conceived through spit wasn't cheap. It was sacred. Now, imagine Exquick's body swelling with the weight of future heroes, each kick a whisper of myth in her belly. She didn't hide in shame. She sang. And when the time came, she birthed them not in a palace, but beneath a ceiba tree, the axis mundi, the tree that connects sky, earth, and underworld. The symbolism is layered. Death gives way to life, shame gives way to prophecy, and a woman marked for execution becomes the mother of cosmic balance. You can't help but wonder, how many real Mayan women heard this tale and saw themselves not in the punishment but in the power? Let's flip the lens. In The Erotic Spirit Through History, Peter Webb notes that many cultures feared female agency in conception. The Mayans, by contrast, celebrated it, sometimes in secret, sometimes in stone. In some temples, glyphs depict women alone, whispering to trees, touching swollen bellies while surrounded by serpents and stars. These weren't passive vessels. They were bridges between worlds, and often the act of creation wasn't sexual at all, but spiritual, whispered, surreal. Here's your fringe detail. In certain rituals, midwives carried a cup of water and a piece of cloth said to contain divine spit, a symbolic relic made from herbs and old chants. Before birth, the water was poured over the mother's belly while lullabies were sung in ancient tongues. It was believed that this blessed water would help the baby emerge with clarity of soul and strength of breath. The cloth? Placed under the baby's head for its first night, so it would dream of gods, not ghosts. And now, a tale from Sex with Kings. There's a lesser-known record from Quirigua about a prince who claimed descent not from a marriage but from a dream. His mother, a priestess, had never known a man. But during a blood moon, she slept beneath a calabash tree and woke with damp lips and the unmistakable knowledge that she carried life. Her son was born with a star-shaped birthmark on his palm. As he grew, he spoke to snakes, solved disputes without raising a hand, and once, during a drought, summoned rain by spitting into the sky. His rivals mocked him. His people built him a temple. Let's not forget the twins themselves. Born of a scandal, they became legends. Their story isn't just heroism, it's a study in duality. One cautious, the other bold. One serious, the other playful. They balance each other. They challenge the underworld not with violence, but with wit and rhythm. Their victories are earned through trickery, laughter, and emotional agility. And at the end of their journey, they don't just defeat death. They become celestial bodies, sun and moon, male and female energy, forever orbiting, forever entwined. And yes, scholars still debate the gender of the twins. While often portrayed as male, some regional myths blur their lines, suggesting one was gender fluid, or that the two were aspects of a single soul. This ambiguity wasn't a flaw. It was sacred. The Maya understood that creation doesn't emerge from simplicity, but from tension, from blend, from contradiction made flesh. Foucault would nod knowingly here. This isn't just about birth. It's about legitimacy, power, the right to exist without conventional permission. The twins weren't born of law. They were born of need, mystery, and spit. Their story gives permission to all those told they shouldn't be, that they're mistakes. The Maya made those people gods. And you? You sit there now, mouth slightly open, suddenly aware of your own breath, of how your body stores stories. You think of all the times you've kissed someone and tasted something unnameable, hope, grief, memory. The mouth isn't just where language lives, it's where futures begin. So you close your eyes and feel it again, the myth sliding against your skin like warm rain. Not quite real, not quite gone. The story of the twins isn't just a tale, it's a ritual, a challenge, a dare to exist boldly, to love strangely, to honor the spit that made you. You slide past woven curtains into the cool hush of a royal chamber. It smells of crushed flowers, obsidian dust, and something more deliberate, copal, still burning from a divination ritual. Inside, everything is curated for effect. on the polished floor, shells arranged in a spiral, symbols of fertility and the ocean's secrets. On the walls, glyphs that depict lovers turning into stars. At the center, seated like she owns every breath in the room, because she does, is a Mayan queen. And she's not waiting for a king. She's waiting for the sky. Because tonight, her lover is not a man. It's destiny. And in this story, queens seduce more than hearts. They seduce time itself. This is Lady Six Sky, ruler of Naranjo, one of the most powerful city-states of the classic Maya. She arrives not as a bride, but as a storm. Her father sends her to a foreign city, technically as a political pawn, but she steps off the litter not in submission, but in full ceremonial regalia, wrapped in blue-green feathers, eyes sharp enough to carve jade. The nobles murmur. The scribes scribble. She says nothing, just raises a hand and declares a new calendar count. A new order. Her reign begins not with blood, but with breath. And breath, to the Maya, was sacred currency. Let's not pretend this is about paperwork. Lady Six Sky wasn't content with governance. She staged ritual dances dressed as moon goddesses, led battle campaigns, and personally oversaw temple constructions. In one mural, she's shown emerging from the mouth of a celestial serpent, holding a bloodletting bowl in one hand and a mirror in the other. The implication is clear. She doesn't reflect the gods. She contains them. And her intimacy? It was never accidental. She used it as policy, as prophecy. And if you think that sounds manipulative, you've never seen politics done with eyeliner and lunar mathematics. Mayan queens weren't passive priestesses, they were cosmological architects. They chose their lovers based on lineage, yes, but also on timing, glyph compatibility, and celestial alignments. One surviving codex even lists auspicious days for conjugal union of female ruler and selected consort, complete with symbols for fertility, storm risk, and potential for twins. These were spreadsheets of seduction, metrics of myth and biology. And you better believe the stars had to agree. But let's step beyond Lady Six Sky. Consider Lady Kabul of El Peru Waka, another power queen who was granted the rare title of Kalumte, essentially supreme warlord. She wielded more authority than her husband and wore it like a second skin. Her marriage was a political maneuver, sure, but her public rituals? Intimate, elaborate, and always cosmically timed. During Venus transitions, she led ceremonies in which she fasted, performed bloodletting, and received dreams interpreted by female astronomers. One night, during a storm, she emerged from her temple clad only in obsidian beads and maize paste, reenacting the role of Ixchel embracing the rain god Chak. The following season brought floods. Her enemies called it witchcraft. Her people called it proof. Historians still argue whether these erotic rituals were symbolic theater or literal events, but given the archaeological evidence, glyphs of entwined bodies, ceremonial beds carved with planetary patterns, records of queenly pregnancies tied to eclipses, it's hard not to suspect that Mayan royal intimacy was both lived and layered. Sex wasn't just personal, it was national security. Let's get a little scandalous. From Sex with Kings, Eleanor Herman recounts how royal women across civilizations used cosmetics and scent to manipulate perception. Mayan queens elevated this to divine practice. They anointed their thighs with fragrant oils during ceremonies, not for lovers, but for the gods. One recipe, found etched into a temple wall, combines ground cacao, crushed flowers, chili, and snake oil, an aphrodisiac so potent it was said to make even statues blush. One queen applied it before every negotiation. Not every man agreed with her, but none could look away. You want a more human story? There's a tale from a northern site, possibly Ekbalam, about a queen who fell in love with her scribe. He was poor, awkward, born under a glyph associated with bad luck and stubborn feet. But he spoke to her with poems, and one night, during a festival of Ixchel, she invited him to her observatory. They lay beneath a slit in the ceiling aligned with the Pleiades, and she whispered, "Tonight, if the stars touch your name, I'll change your glyph." 9 months later, their child was born with 6 fingers and a voice that could calm storms. The dynasty didn't last, but the story did. Chiseled into wall fragments, passed down in lullabies. It was never about bloodlines. It was about boldness. And here's a fringe curiosity for you. In some noble households, mirrors were kept under beds. Not for vanity, but for omen checking. After intimacy, the couple would gaze into the obsidian glass. If their reflections were whole, the union was blessed. If cracked or blurry, a spiritual offering was required. Some mirrors, uncovered in burial sites, still bear the faint outlines of lovers' faces, etched in by fingernails. Love wasn't sealed with a kiss. It was sealed with reflection. Now Foucault would remind us that the queen's body is never hers alone. It is a symbol, a territory, a text. And in Mayan courts, that was not hidden. Queens were recorded not just by deeds, but by intimacies, glyphs that marked sacred unions, moments of ritualized fertility, even symbolic menstruation synced to lunar charts. Their bodies were archives, their skin, scripture. And what about cosmetics? A final detail. Red pigment applied to nipples was considered a mark of divine readiness, especially during lunar rituals. Not pornographic, sacred. A way to echo Ixchel's own markings. During one coronation, a queen was painted in full body glyphs, and when the moon rose, she stepped into a basin of water, dissolving the paint. It was said she emerged invisible to lies. Her consort, watching, wept. Power here was performative, but also deeply tender. So you lie there, bathed in memory, letting the scent of cacao and crushed dreams swirl around your head. The queens weren't ornaments. They weren't side characters. They seduced gods, scheduled empires, and made love under eclipse-shadowed skies, not for pleasure alone, but to shift the axis of history. They knew the stakes, they knew the glyphs, and they moved through their world like comets in silk. And somewhere, in a temple still buried under vines, there's a carving of a queen pressing her hand to a stone, eyes closed, lips slightly parted, not in desire, but in certainty. She's not asking permission, she's marking time. You jolt awake to the sound of something soft but certain, a feather brushing skin, or maybe a whisper in a language older than breathing. The night is dense, not quiet, but pregnant. You're not alone. All around you, the jungle hums, but it's not the usual buzz. It's a kind of coded message, half warning, half lullaby. Something's watching, but it's not hostile. It's familiar. You turn your head and see eyes in the dark, not human, not entirely animal. They blink, then vanish. What you just felt? That wasn't fear. That was prophecy. Because in the Mayan world, intimacy didn't belong only to humans. The gods spoke through animals, and animals, in turn, whispered secrets into your dreams. Tonight, you're about to learn how Mayans flirted with fate using jaguars, owls, deer, and how your next romantic decision might have once been determined by a twitch of a monkey's tail. You start with the jaguar, not as predator, but as seducer. In Mayan mythology, the jaguar is the embodiment of the underworld sun, but it's also the companion of dreamers and lovers. A woman who dreams of a jaguar circling her house was said to be visited by an ancestral lover, asking permission to be reborn. If she accepts in the dream, maybe with a touch, maybe with a kiss, she might wake pregnant. Sometimes without ever having touched a man. Fringe myth? Sure. But in some villages, such births were celebrated, not shamed. Jaguar children were trained early to interpret omens, to dance during eclipses, to keep secrets. And you better believe they were popular. Everyone wants to date someone who might be half divine. But jaguars weren't the only flirty familiars. Owls, often feared as death omens in other cultures, had a surprisingly seductive role in Mayan lore. If an owl hooted outside your window on a specific night, especially during the day of Khan, you were supposed to rise from bed, light a candle, and recite a poem to it. This wasn't superstition. It was courtship, because owls carried messages from lovers too shy or too dead to say things aloud. One record tells of a widow who received nightly visits from an owl. Each time, she'd read a line of her late husband's love poems to the bird. On the final night, it dropped a feather. The next morning, she was found smiling in her sleep, hand curled around the quill. And now, a less spooky, more playful animal, the deer. In Mayan courtship rituals, deer were considered symbols of youthful flirtation. Their graceful gait, wide eyes, and sudden stillness were mimicked in ceremonial dances. Young women might wear antlered headdresses and step lightly around a central fire, occasionally leaping toward a chosen partner. If he caught her wrist mid-leap, it meant she was open to his proposal. If she leapt out of reach, better luck next cycle. Deer dances weren't just entertainment. They were rituals of invitation. And in dreams, seeing a deer meant your heart was open, maybe too open. Let's slide into your sex story. In Sex with Kings, there's a tale of a Mayan noblewoman, known only by her nickname Ixtepeu, Lady Moss, who claimed to have chosen her lovers based entirely on animal signs. She kept a journal, etched into bark, of course, recording which animals visited her dreams and what they did. A howler monkey dancing meant joy. A crocodile basking meant caution. A hummingbird feeding? Passion imminent. Before taking a new lover, she'd wait for 3 signs. Once, she ignored the signs and acted out of impulse. The lover was charming but disloyal. The next time she waited 12 nights until an ocelot purred in her dream. That lover stayed. His descendants still claim to have animal hearts. Let's talk real-world practice. In many Mayan homes, dream interpretation wasn't just spiritual, it was social. Every morning, people would share their dreams around the hearth. Grandmothers interpreted the symbols. If a girl dreamt of snakes, she might be warned not to flirt with the boys near the cacao trees. If a boy dreamt of a limp bird, elders might suggest an herbal tonic. And if 2 people dreamt of the same animal on the same night, that was a sign. They were meant to meet. Some families even arranged trial marriages based on dream synchronicity. Not, what's your sign, but what animal did you see? Now let's get weird, in the best way. Some animals weren't seen in dreams, but worn. Yes, worn. Talismans of bone, feather, or fur were tied around waists or slipped into tunics during courtship. One particularly daring ritual involved lovers exchanging pouches of animal-scented herbs. Each was infused with musk, sweat, and an animal's essence, usually gathered by rubbing the pouch on a live creature's back. Romantic? No. Effective? Oh yes. If the pouches smelled compatible, or at least not revolting, intimacy was encouraged. If not, the gods had spoken. Here's your fringe curiosity. Certain temples housed dream animals, living ones, often birds or monkeys, raised by priestesses trained to interpret their behavior. On designated nights, couples would bring offerings, then sleep in the temple's outer chamber. In the morning, the animals' actions, who they approached, what they touched, were read as signs of the couple's future. A toucan pecking at a man's foot? Jealousy issues. A parrot mimicking laughter? A blessed union? A monkey throwing feces? Well, maybe time to reevaluate. Now, a Foucault twist. This isn't just about dreams or folklore. This is surveillance of the self. Intimacy for the Maya wasn't just about consent. It was about alignment. You didn't touch without permission. From the other person, yes, but also from the sky, the animals, the shadows. It's a kind of sacred bureaucracy, one that asks, before every desire, does the world agree? And you might roll your eyes used to modern spontaneity, but what if there's beauty in asking the universe first? What if your desires feel deeper when echoed back by something wild? And here's a final human tale. In the Highlands, a scribe named Shul kept a dream journal for 30 years. He never married, never took a lover. His dreams were filled with coyotes and snakes, and once, a talking turtle. Then, at 52, he dreamt of a jaguar purring in his lap while a bird sang nearby. The next day, he met a traveler, an older woman with stories of stars and smoke. They spoke all night. The next night, they shared a fire. A week later, they disappeared together. His journal ends with one final line scrawled hastily. The animals have finished speaking. I go now, to listen in person. So now you lie there, eyes half closed, listening to the rustle in the trees, the hush of feathered wings. The night is thick with signs. And maybe, just maybe, something out there is watching you. Not to judge, but to guide, to nudge, to remind you that love doesn't always arrive on 2 feet. Sometimes it circles you in fur. Sometimes it hoots at your window. Sometimes it comes in a dream, as a whisper with claws asking softly, "Are you ready to be seen?" There's a moment when you look up at the stars and they don't seem distant anymore. Not cold, not unreachable, just close, personal. Like you've walked in on a private moment, and they're deciding whether to let you stay. That's how the Maya saw the night sky, not as backdrop, but as stage. And what played out on it? Not just hero journeys and omens. No, the constellations were actors in a never-ending celestial orgy, whispering, shifting, touching, betraying. Tonight, you're going to watch them move, and not just in circles, in fevered spirals of desire, shame, and rebirth. Because for the Maya, the stars didn't just twinkle, they climaxed. It begins with Scorpio, the scorpion. But in Mayan mythology, this constellation isn't about sting or death. It's about pursuit, lust. A story told in glyphs describes Scorpio chasing a moon goddess across the sky, not to harm her, but to woo her. Each night, he gets a little closer. On the full moon, he almost touches. And during eclipses? Well, that's when things get complicated. Some say they make love, and the darkness is their privacy curtain. Others say she rejects him violently, and the eclipse is her scream. Either way, the whole sky pauses to watch. And so do you. You shift on your mat, feeling the heat rise. The Maya didn't need drama on Earth. They had it overhead. The Orion constellation was a warrior, yes, but also a lover caught in a 3-way feud with the Pleiades and a storm god. According to one version of the tale, Orion once loved the Pleiades as a whole, not just one star, but the cluster, the group, the collective femininity. But he couldn't choose, and so the stars fled, scattering into the sky. His belt? It's all that's left, tight, longing, unresolved. A cosmic waistband of what could have been. And every time he rises, the Pleiades shimmer nearby, not closer, not further, just forever out of reach. Here's where it gets juicy. During solstices and equinoxes, the Maya staged constellation reenactments, not for fun, but for divine reenactment. Couples would dress as their zodiac counterparts and act out their entanglements, sometimes with music, sometimes with masks, sometimes with nothing at all. One stela from Yaxchilan shows a noble pair wrapped in serpents under a canopy of star glyphs, clearly mid-embrace. The caption? They move like the sky. This wasn't metaphor. This was astronomy performed through touch. Let's add a layer. The ecliptic, the path the sun travels, was seen as a celestial road where lovers chased and passed each other. Venus and Mars, especially, had a reputation. Venus would rise early, shimmering, seductive. Mars followed, slow and red. One myth tells of Mars waiting too long to confess his love, and when he finally did, Venus had already moved to another quadrant. She still glances back occasionally, which is why some nights you can see them together, briefly, close but never aligned. And if you think that doesn't hurt, you've never waited for someone who's always just 5 minutes too late. Now for your sex story. In Sex with Kings, there's a record of a Mayan ruler who commissioned a star chamber, a private observatory aligned with seasonal constellations. But it wasn't for science. It was for seduction. He brought lovers there only during specific star alignments, each one chosen to match the mood he wanted to create. A night under Scorpio, passion, under Gemini, twin games, under the Milky Way's rise. Gentle, slow, dreamlike connection. His most infamous encounter took place during a Venus-Mars conjunction, when he invited two rival courtiers and made them reconcile, biblically, beneath the blinking approval of their heavenly analogs. No one challenged him again. Let's get esoteric. The Milky Way, called the White Road or Sakbi, was believed to be the backbone of the sky, a road of spirits, semen, and sacred fluid. During certain festivals, it was said to leak, its brightness interpreted as the gods releasing energy into the world. Couples were encouraged to conceive during these bright nights, not just for fertility, but for prophecy. Children born under a white road crossing were said to speak with stars. Some became priests, others went mad, but all were loved fiercely, as gifts from a universe mid-ecstasy. Here's your fringe curiosity. In a recently uncovered codex fragment, there's a description of a ritual called the Star Pulse. During it, a chosen couple would be placed in a circular room painted with constellations. They'd drink cacao infused with wild tobacco and passion flower, then lie back to back. Their bodies were painted with glyphs of their star signs. As music played, slow drums, bone flutes, heartbeats, they were to sync their breathing, movements, even their dreams. A priest watched for signs, simultaneous twitching, shared sighs, glowing skin. If the signs appeared, they were declared celestially bound. If not, they were blessed separately and asked to try again next cycle. Failure wasn't shame. It was mistiming. And now Foucault would step in and say, "See, even intimacy is disciplined by the sky." But the Maya didn't see it as control. They saw it as harmony. You didn't make love when you wanted. You made love when the stars were ready. And when they were, everything shimmered. Bodies felt lighter. Touch became language. And climax wasn't just pleasure, it was alignment. A minor supernova of the soul. Let's not forget the role of sound. During celestial orgy nights, priests played star music, chords tuned to planetary movements, scales derived from comet arcs. One bone flute found in a noble woman's tomb is tuned to a dissonant scale that matches the rising of Sirius. It was said she played it before choosing a lover, letting the notes guide her body like tides. Her name is lost, but her flute is cracked from use. You do the math. And finally, a human tale. A man and a woman, strangers, meet at a solstice festival. They wear matching glyphs without knowing. That night, they both dream of a deer leaping through a sky on fire. The next day, they find each other. They don't speak. They don't need to. They make love beneath a starlit roof while the constellations trace ancient paths above them. 9 months later, a child is born with a birthmark shaped like Orion's belt. The midwife smiles and says, "The sky wanted this." The child grows up wild, brilliant, maybe a little too fast. He dies young, but his story is carved in stone, and people still touch it when they want love to feel like fate. So now you lie back again, the night pressing against your skin like a warm hand. The stars above you aren't still. They're shifting, panting, colliding, pulling apart. And you? You're not watching. You're participating. Because when the Maya looked at the sky, they didn't just map it. They mirrored it. Desire wasn't hidden. It was written in fire. Steam rises in curling spirals around your face, and for a moment, you're weightless. Not floating, but suspended in time, like a prayer trapped in breath. You sit low in a temazcal, a Mayan sweat lodge, naked except for the stories you carry. The stone walls pulse with heat, their surfaces slick with condensation and ancient intention. Someone pours water on the rocks. A hiss erupts. The air thickens. You inhale smoke, flour, heat, memory. And just like that, your body is no longer yours. It belongs to the gods. Or perhaps to whoever's sweating beside you, their thigh brushing yours, their heartbeat echoing the same ancient rhythm. This isn't just a bathhouse. This is a portal. Because in the Mayan world, purification was never just about cleanliness. It was erotic rebirth. Temazcals weren't spas. They were sanctuaries for healing, preparation, transformation. Warriors entered them before battle, mothers before childbirth. But most intimately, lovers entered them before becoming something more than flesh. This wasn't romance. It was alchemy. Couples were often brought here before marriage, not for premarital sex, but for sacred steaming. The midwives or elders guiding the ceremony would chant, burn herbs, sometimes whisper ribald jokes, and always monitor breath. The goal? To strip away illusion, to open the skin, to soften the space between two people so the gods might slip in and tie their souls together with steam. Let's set the scene. The couple sits close, not touching, but not apart. A paste of crushed petals, cacao, and sweat is smeared on their chests. The woman wears a necklace of dried chili and honeycomb, the man a belt made of twisted maize leaves. Each element is symbolic: desire, sweetness, fertility. A priestess chants names of deities: Ixchel, Chaak, the maize god. The steam rises again, hot, dense. Your breath catches. They're told to look into each other's eyes, not mouths. Touching is forbidden until the final breath. What happens next is unscripted, but sacred. Some couples cry, some laugh, some faint. And when they emerge, wet, flushed, trembling, they're reborn. Not as individuals, but as a pair. Here's a detail most history books skip. Some temazcals were shaped like wombs. Small, round, with narrow entrances and low ceilings, these structures forced the body into fetal positions. Crawling in was symbolic of returning to the mother. Crawling out was symbolic of rebirth. But when two people entered together, it was a shared rebirth. And the sweat they left behind? That wasn't just waste. It was offering. Some elders collected it in gourds and buried it beneath new crops. Because love, the Maya believed, should nourish more than memory. It should feed the earth. Now let's stir in your fringe curiosity. In one highland village, couples who struggled to conceive would be led into a temazcal during a full moon. The steam would be laced with aphrodisiacs: basil, passion flower, a touch of wild bee venom. They'd be instructed to sit back to back, exchange dreams aloud, then pour water over each other's shoulders. No touching elsewhere. No climax. Just breath, intention, and belief. One midwife's log records 17 pregnancies within 3 months of such ceremonies. Coincidence? Or the gods listening from the steam? You're ready for tonight's story. From Sex with Kings, there's a passage about a ruler who required all his courtiers to undergo weekly steam lodge rituals. Not just for hygiene, but for loyalty. He believed sweat revealed secrets, and he wasn't wrong. One night, he invited a scribe he suspected of betrayal. They entered together. Hours passed. At the end, the scribe confessed, not to treason, but to love, with the king's own brother. Instead of punishment, the king arranged a quiet union for them. Better an honest lover, he said, than a dishonest court. The sweat lodge wasn't only for couples, it was for ghosts. Some temazcals were used to contact the dead. The steam became a veil between worlds. One myth tells of a woman who entered alone, seeking her lost child. She poured water on the stones, sang lullabies, and when the steam cleared, she saw her son, grown, smiling, holding a flower. He told her to let go, to love again. The next week, she remarried. Her new child was born during an eclipse, named Smoke Between Worlds, and now a Foucault angle, because we must. The temazcal disciplines the body, controls heat, motion, space. But instead of repression, it releases, inverts power. The ruler and the servant, the priest and the potter. Naked, sweating, equal. Vulnerability becomes the great leveler. Intimacy isn't hidden here, it's expected. And that alone makes it radical. Let's not forget sound. Steam rituals weren't silent. Drums outside, humming within. One particularly erotic rite involved paired breathing. Inhale together, exhale staggered, matching until breath becomes indistinguishable. Some couples reported visions. Others reported arousal without contact. Some said they saw serpents coil around their bodies. One temple carving even shows a pair of lovers, eyes locked, surrounded by rising glyphs shaped like steam. They're not touching, but the heat between them? You can almost feel it in the stone. And now, your odd but beautiful detail. Some Mayan lovers tattooed steam glyphs on their wrists after rituals. Tiny spirals, like breath exhaled in winter. They called them second mouths, reminders that the body speaks not only through words, but through warmth. Touch one, and you could feel a memory rise. Here's a modern footnote. In parts of Guatemala and southern Mexico today, temazcal traditions persist. Couples still steam before weddings, women still sing to the stones, and midwives still guide young lovers through rites where nothing is penetrated but illusion. The language has changed, but the breath remains. So here you are again, lying back, skin damp, heartbeat slowing. The night outside the lodge is quiet now, but within you, everything stirs. The body remembers what the mind forgets. That intimacy isn't just friction, it's permission, surrender, a shared inhale in a space where the gods lean close. And when you finally emerge, blinking at the stars, dripping with salt and something sacred, you feel it. Not purity, not sin, just clarity. Like the steam has made you transparent. Like someone could look right through you and still choose to stay. You open your eyes and the world looks slightly different. Not because the light has changed, but because you have. Or maybe it's not even you anymore. Maybe the body you're in was never entirely fixed to begin with. In the Mayan world, gender wasn't a box. It was a constellation. Fluid, sacred, and eternally in motion. Tonight, you'll drift into stories where gods swap genitals, warriors channel femininity for power, and the cosmos itself refuses to settle on either he or she. This isn't modern liberal theory trying to retrofit ancient culture. This is the truth etched in stone, whispered in ritual, and painted in the color of transformation. The stars flicker above, but instead of twinkling coldly, they pulse with something warmer. You recall the deity Itzamna, a creator, a healer, a god of knowledge and fertility. Often described with male pronouns, yes, but in countless depictions, he births the world from his own body. No female consort, no seed from elsewhere, just him, splitting open the universe like a ripe fruit. Some versions of the myth suggest he did this by swallowing a jade bead. Others say he bled from his tongue until life emerged. Either way, it's not masculine in any traditional sense. It's womb energy, creator energy. And the Maya didn't blink twice. Why should they? Creation required balance, not binaries. Now shift your gaze to Ixchel, the moon goddess. Fierce, loving, deadly. She isn't fixed either. In some myths, she appears as a young temptress, skin glowing, hair dripping with starlight. In others, she's an old crone with bones for jewelry and claws for fingernails. She isn't feminine the way magazines pretend to define it. She is the arc, the totality. And she doesn't just partner with the rain god Chak. She becomes him during specific lunar rituals. There's a tale from the Yucatan that during certain eclipses, Ixchel dresses in thunder and takes on Chak's form to weep rain onto the earth. She's not pretending. She's transforming. Gender, in her hands, is a garment of weather. Now let's talk bodies. There's a glyph found repeatedly on ceramic vases and codices, a figure with both male and female traits, broad shoulders, wide hips, facial hair, and pronounced breasts. Scholars call this the A-Cham-An, the Twilight Dancer. In ritual dances, people dressed in mirrored costumes to embody this duality. Sometimes the left side of the body was painted with male symbols, spear, sun, snake, while the right bore female marks, moon, flower, water. The dancer would spin slowly, blurring the halves until the audience couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. This wasn't a gimmick. It was theology in motion. You want a story? Here's one from The Erotic Spirit Through History. In a temple in Copan, two lovers were said to meet in secret under Venus's shadow. One was a priest, the other a temple dancer born with ambiguous sex characteristics. Instead of hiding, they embraced ambiguity. Their love was recorded in poems as the braid of sky, a union of dual strands, strong only together. When their affair was discovered, instead of punishment, the priests' community elected both of them to serve as joint dream interpreters. Because who better to speak to the gods than someone who could embody all human form? Let's zoom out. The Popol Vuh, the Mayan creation epic, includes multiple figures who shift form, not just gender, but species. One god turns from man to woman to jaguar to fish within a single passage. And in every form, he or she or they express love, desire, hunger, grief. The text never corrects itself. There is no true form, only movement, only context. Scholars still argue whether these shape-shifting myths were literal beliefs or metaphorical devices, but the implications are profound. If the divine isn't fixed, why should we be? And now your fringe curiosity. In some Mayan households, there existed the third fire, a small hearth kept separate from the cooking fire and the ancestral altar. This fire was tended by individuals who didn't conform to gender norms, often unmarried, childless, and revered. They were called Xochibal, not a slur, but a title. They were healers, mediators, matchmakers. When couples fought, they came to the third fire. When children were confused, they asked the Xochibal. One Spanish friar noted bitterly that these people are neither man nor woman, and yet all bow to them. He misunderstood. They weren't bowed to out of fear. They were bowed to out of awe. Here's your sex story, courtesy of Sex with Kings. A noble court in what is now Chiapas once recorded a marriage between a warrior and a dream seer who refused all gendered pronouns. At the wedding, instead of traditional roles, both partners wore mirrored masks. Their vows were recited simultaneously. Later, they led a ritual dance dressed in dual-colored cloaks, switching sides every few beats. Their union was blessed by a priestess who declared, "This is not man and woman. This is storm and root. This is balance." Their children, adopted from orphans and raised in mirrored rooms, were said to speak in rhymes until age 7. Let's go tactile. In Mayan textiles, patterns often echoed this duality. Zigzag motifs were not merely decorative, they represented the flow between poles. Some cloth was woven by men, others by women, but the most sacred garments were woven together, passed hand to hand in a circle, changing weavers each hour. The result? A garment without fixed authorship, worn only by those undergoing rites of passage, gender transition, or spiritual awakening. Some called them the sky's skin. And Foucault would smirk and say, "Ah, so power is also the power to become." And he'd be right. Because in a world where roles were usually inherited, the ability to shift, to defy categorization, was radical power. Not rejection, reclamation. Now, for something tactile and beautiful, lovers who identified beyond the binary often exchanged obsidian discs, not rings, as symbols of their union. The discs were smooth on one side, rough on the other. Each partner wore both, flipped according to mood, message, moment. If one disc was turned smooth up during an argument, it meant, "I will listen." If both discs were rough, "Give me space." If both were smooth, well, you can guess. You can. So now here you are, lying in the jungle night, skin cooling, mind wide open. You feel a breeze and don't know if it's the wind or a spirit passing. You touch your own chest and feel both softness and strength. You smile. Because for the Maya, to be whole was never to be one thing. It was to be many, layered, shifting, sacred. And you finally understand. Gender wasn't fixed. It was seasonal, elemental, astronomical, a dance of smoke and stone. And you? You're not confused. You're just in motion, like the gods intended. You're sipping something now. It's thick, bitter, warm, and tastes like temptation laced with thunder. Your tongue tingles. Your pulse skips. You blink, and for a moment, the stars above ripple. This is no ordinary drink. This is a brew with teeth, a potion designed not just to quench, but to conjure. You've just taken a mouthful of Mayan love medicine, a ceremonial aphrodisiac brewed not in kitchens but in shrines, calculated to align hearts with planets, mouths with memory, and bodies with destiny. Tonight, we drink like the ancients, and what we swallow is far more dangerous than alcohol. It's intimacy in liquid form. Start with cacao, not sweetened, not milked, but raw, dark, foamed. The Maya called it cacao, and it was their sacred elixir, brewed thick with water and spices, often chili, sometimes vanilla, sometimes blood. Served in carved vessels painted with erotic glyphs, this wasn't a beverage, it was a spell. Lovers drank it before rituals, warriors before battle, queens before childbirth. It didn't just energize, it opened the soul. And in the hands of a shaman, it could break you wide open, flood your chest with visions, stir your skin until you wept without reason. It was said that a good cacao ceremony could make you fall in love with someone you'd never met, or with yourself, if the moon agreed. Now add balshay, a fermented drink made from the bark of the leguminous balshay tree, mixed with honey and water. Served in gourds, cloudy and tangy, it was considered the drink of the ancestors. But it had side effects, not just intoxication, but lowered inhibitions, dreamlike memory, and a heightened sensitivity to touch. In some rites, balshay was consumed in silence, each sip a question sent skyward. If your body responded, goosebumps, tears, arousal, it was believed the gods had heard you. If your partner responded the same way, that was a sign. The two of you were aligned. Let's mix in a lesser-known potion, one from the margins, a stimulant derived from crushed morning glory seeds, soaked and filtered, then added to cacao. This was not your average date-night drink. In high doses, it induced visions. In small doses, it made the skin electric. Some villages called it the tongue flower for its curious effect of making kisses feel longer, warmer, and vaguely time-altering. One couple, according to an oral myth, drank it beneath a lunar eclipse, kissed once, and swore they didn't come apart until dawn. They became healers, or liars, but the story stayed. And here's where it gets ritualistic. During courtship festivals, young couples would be led into moonlit groves by elders. There, they'd be given a cup, half cacao, half balchet, infused with local herbs specific to their birth glyphs. Drinking it was an act of mutual submission. I see your spirit. I welcome its heat. Afterward, they were not to speak. Only hold hands. If their palms began to sweat in sync, they were considered brewing. If their breathing synced by night's end, marriage was recommended. Now for your nightly story. In Sex with Kings, we learn of a Maya queen who employed a court alchemist, an elder woman who brewed personalized aphrodisiacs. This queen, known as Lady Chakshu, refused to sleep with any suitor unless he passed her test, drinking a concoction she called Venus milk. Its recipe? Fermented cacao, ground orchid root, a few drops of the queen's own blood, and the pollen of a moon-blooming flower. If the man survived the taste, most didn't. He would begin to speak poetry, not his own, but hers, reciting her dreams aloud without knowing the words. Only one man ever passed. He became her consort. Their pillow talk? Prophecies. And now your quirky fringe fact. Some Mayan love potions were brewed not to attract, but to forget. One blend made from crushed toad skin, yes, really, bitter bark, and a specific black seed was said to remove longing. Given to widows, rejected lovers, or grieving parents, it was called the quiet heart. But in secret, some lovers used it on themselves when they felt they were falling too fast. Not to stop the love, but to delay it, to buy time. Because even in ancient times, timing was everything. Let's not forget physical rituals. After the drink, there was dance. Not wild, but slow, focused. Dancers would move in tight circles, fingers brushing, breath exchanging, but lips never touching. The goal was to let the brew circulate through motion, to feel each other without clutching. One dancer wrote in a clay diary, still intact, "We move like rain, fall together, and never know where one droplet ends." And you begin to see how the Maya didn't just drink to loosen tongues. They drank to dissolve boundaries. Foucault would grin. The control of desire through ritual, the ingestion of identity, the body as laboratory and altar. In Mayan cosmology, the body is not owned. It's borrowed. From the earth, the sky, and each person who dares to touch it with reverence. So when you sip a potion, you're not changing who you are. You're remembering. And yes, there were failures. Some lovers reacted badly, vomiting, sobbing, screaming truths that should have stayed buried. One story tells of a couple who drank too much cacao laced with passion flower. They laughed for 3 days, then grew silent, then parted without speaking. It's said they met again, years later on the same lunar day, and simply bowed to each other, hands over hearts. Their love had fermented into myth. Now, your final taste. A drink shared by elder couples, those who'd passed 50 cycles of the moon together. A mild mix of cacao, maize milk, and crushed rose petals. It wasn't for arousal, it was for memory. They called it the echo cup. When shared slowly, it was said to bring back the feelings of their first night, without changing a single wrinkle. Because desire, in Mayan thought, was not youth. It was recognition, of soul, of scent, of story. So here you are now, cup empty, lips tingling. You close your eyes and let the warmth settle in your chest. The night doesn't feel cooler. It feels clearer. You remember someone, not their face, not their words, but how they made your skin sing. That's the brew working. That's the spell. You've just swallowed 3,000 years of ritual, and it tastes like longing, sweet, bitter, inevitable. You're standing on a raised viewing platform above a mile-wide cenote, the water black as obsidian, and so still it mirrors stars. Below, the surface ripples ever so slightly, not from wind, but from something deep, pulsing. The cenote isn't just water. It's a doorway, a mirror, a lover's whisper echoing through the underworld of your bones. Tonight, you're about to learn how sacred wells, Caves and water mirrors were the Mayan version of speeding up love, where reflection becomes seduction and gravity bends around ritual. Imagine you lean over the edge, drop a flower petal onto the surface. It floats, golden and fragile. But the moment it touches, the cenote responds, not with splash, but subtle wave. The stars rip and shimmer, and you feel it. The well knows you're watching. Cenotes were not nature's oopsies. They were cultivated portals, gateways between people and gods, bodies and depths, desire and prophecy. To lean over them wasn't voyeurism, it was invocation. Mayan lovers didn't stare at their own reflections in smartphones. They stared into cenotes. A virgin girl approaching adulthood might be brought to the well under the full moon. She'd whisper her name, her fear, her longing into the echoing cave. A priestess would drop a little clay doll shaped like the goddess Ixchel into the water. If the doll floated back, the girl was destined for union. If it sunk, she must wait or prepare offerings. Sometimes that meant artfully weaving blood-red thread into her hair or fasting with balshay. The answer came not from chance, but from water listening. You push a twig into the mirror and watch ripples fan outwards. In Mayan thought, ripples were words. Each vibration carried meaning. If a ripple formed a cross, you might expect prophecy. If 3 concentric circles, pregnancy. If nothing, danger. So lovers learned to read the surface of water like texts. They brought herbs, petals, even blood, expecting patterns to emerge. Sometimes florid patterns. Sometimes warnings. One ripple shaped like a jaguar paw. Others, a feather. Each was message and omen and dare. Now let's wade into the ritual. One famous rite, known as the cenote of lovers, was reserved for couples on the verge of commitment. Under a sky painted by Venus, they'd kneel at the edge, dip hands into the well, and look for bubbles. If the bubbles kissed at the center, meaning they collided softly, the union was blessed. If the bubbles drifted apart quietly, it meant caution. Forever. And if multiple bubbles arose quickly and popped violently, passion foretold, but also risk. One couple reportedly waited 4 nights until the bubbles aligned, and their marriage lasted 30 cycles of the goddess before the man left for war. Now here's your sex with kings moment. A Mayan nobleman invited suitors to a cenote ball during Venus's maximum brightness. They descended by stone stairs, dressed in ceremonial jade masks, and offered cacao balshay mixtures to a priestess at the water's edge after kissing the cenote mirror. If they didn't splash. If they bowed deeply instead. If their reflection didn't break, they got a second invitation. Only one suitor eventually passed. He rose from the water, water-streaked and smiling, and was adopted into the royal line. He later married the princess and fathered twins born under eclipse. His legitimacy? Written on water. And let's talk about cenote aesthetics. Some pools had carved stone seats with glyphs of lovers, entwined serpents, and moonflowers. To sit there was to sit inside myth. One especially well-preserved seat shows a couple facing each other, palms touching over the cenote, eyes shut in shared breath, and a small snake between them, head pointing toward the water. That snake represents fertility and guardianship. It's not subtle. It's ritual art saying, anyone who sits here, surrender. Some couples still visited that seat centuries later, leaving offerings, shells, petals, obsidian shards, in memory that love is water and stone. Historians still argue whether the cenote customs were elite only or practiced village-wide. The archaeological evidence, precise stone carvings, high-quality ceramics, codex notes, suggests at least that elites fetishized cenotes for initiation, union, prophecy. But oral traditions persist. In remote villages today, young women still float cocoa pods in ponds after noon and whisper love wishes. If the pod bobs twice, sometimes thrice, Ideal. If it flips hard, prepare for storm. They may call it superstition, but ancestral memory doesn't lie. Here's your fringe detail. Some cenotes were mined for midwives during postpartum rest rituals. A mother and newborn would both be carried to the well at dawn, where the infant's first bath was mixed with water from the cenote plus a drop of the mother's sweat. The child lay on the mother's chest as they bathed. If the child relaxed, eyes half opened, nothing but peace, it was said they'd live with ease. If they fidgeted, they'd need charms. The water was a judge, a nurturer, and a guide. Now pull in your Foucault lens. The cenote is surveillance and sanctuary. It reflects not just faces, but intention. It disciplines desire through stillness and ripple. To lean in is both a confession and a dare. The gods write back through waves. And you? You risk being seen, not for shame, but for answer. Let's remember that cenote ceremonies weren't all about lovers. Sometimes they were for parting. A sailor or trader heading into the jungle might stand at the edge, toss in a sprig of maize and a feathered cord, and ask for safe passage. If the water stayed calm, good. If it boiled faintly, storm. And his farewell kiss, often given to the mirror as well. If his reflection blurred as it rose, he would not return. And a final human tale. A young woman named Ix-Pom from the jungle pageants once attended for love. She leaned over the cenote at midnight and recited her name for days. One morning, she noticed a petal floating not alone, but circling slowly in a spiral, the shape drawn by her carved glyph necklace. She later met a traveler whose birth glyph was the spiral. They married within weeks, built a home above the well, and taught their children to read water lines. Today, their descendants tend that cenote and guide lovers who still whisper names into the black water. So here you stand, or lie, skin cool, fingers hovering above the surface of your own metaphorical cenote. The night is still, but heavy. You listen for a ripple that isn't random. You feel your breath steady. The water beckons. It's asking, will you whisper what you truly want? And if you do, what waves do you expect in return? You're standing beneath a stela that casts no shadow, just heat, the kind that clings to skin and thought. Behind it, a ball court looms, stone rings watching like eyes, and in the center of it all, a blood-stained altar that's somehow both chilling and magnetic. Welcome to the sacred axis of Mayan timekeeping, where sex wasn't private and sacrifice wasn't just about ending life. It was about maintaining the clockwork of the cosmos. Because in this world, time doesn't tick. It pulses, it moans, it bleeds. And when it falters, intimacy is the only reset button strong enough to seduce the gods back into rhythm. You shift your weight and realize you're not alone. A priest stands beside you, face painted like a jaguar's skull, eyes rimmed in red. He holds a calendar wheel, 2 discs locked in rotation, sacred Solkin and solar Hob. But his other hand clutches a bundle of red string and feathers, symbols not of war, but of ritual coupling. This isn't a battlefield. It's a bedroom, one with cosmic implications. The Maya believed that time was not linear, but cyclical, spiraling through periods of renewal and entropy. To keep the cycle turning, energy had to be fed back into the system. And energy, what the glyphs call kuhul, could come in many forms: blood, breath, song. But most potently, sexual energy. Not hedonistic, not hidden. Channeled. Through symbolic acts, theatrical rituals, and carefully timed unions, intimacy became an engine, each climax a tick on the cosmic clock. Imagine the ritual. A noble couple, chosen for their glyph compatibility and social alignment, fasts for 3 days. On the 4th, under the zenith sun, they enter a temple chamber where incense clouds the ceiling and drums beat in double time. They are painted with glyphs representing the sun and moon, opposites entwined. Their union isn't observed. It's orchestrated. A priest chants the calendar round. Each breath they take, every movement, aligns with sacred intervals. When they climax, it's not a release. It's ignition. Time starts anew. Now your sex with kings moment. One particularly audacious ruler, Chaktok Ichak of Tikal, was said to have timed his lovemaking with his consort to coincide with the precise overlapping of 3 celestial calendars. A moment so rare it only occurred once every 327 years. According to temple inscriptions, as they lay together on a slab of carved limestone, the walls around them vibrated. Not metaphorically. The glyphs record that the sky cracked and restitched itself. Whether the tectonics agree, no one knows, but the story survived. So did their dynasty, for nearly a century. Let's talk blood. Blood wasn't just sacrifice, it was information. The Maya practiced bloodletting during erotic rites not because they were masochists, but because they believed blood carried dreams. When a lover's blood was offered during an eclipse, it wasn't just pain, it was prophecy. One mural shows a woman pricking her tongue with a stingray spine while her partner kneels beside her, cupping the drops in a shell. They both look up, not at each other, but at Venus. As the drops hit the shell, the first glyph of a new calendar cycle appears overhead. Time, they believed, could be summoned through bodily thresholds. Now for your fringe curiosity. In some cities, the ball court itself doubled as a time-sex ritual ground. The losing team, if composed of elite participants, might engage in symbolic coupling acts with priestesses immediately before or after the match. Not as punishment, as renewal. Their defeat was seen as ego death, allowing them to become vessels of pure time. The stone rings above were carved with twin serpents, heads coiled into spirals, Maya shorthand for orgasm and rebirth. Yes, their sports arenas were also time temples. Try explaining that to your gym coach. Foucault would raise an eyebrow here, delighted. Surveillance, symbolic discipline, bodies regulated not by social shame, but divine rhythm. But what he might miss is the intimacy, the willingness of participants not just to perform, but to surrender. Because these rites weren't cold. They were soaked in warmth, in mutual consent and cosmic tenderness. Lovers who performed time rituals were considered the bravest, because they knew their love was temporary, their bodies sacrificial, their passion borrowed from the stars. Now let's add scent. The air during these ceremonies was not just smoky, it was aromatic warfare. Cacao pods burned with chili, crushed copal, even fermented honey. The scent was intoxicating. One ritual text describes it as the breath of time's mouth. Participants were said to sway in rhythm with the smell. Some wept. Some became aroused. One poem reads, "I do not know if I am in love or in orbit." The distinction was irrelevant. Both were gravitational. Here's a human tale for you. 2 lovers from Copan, born in rival houses, declared their union during a Venus alignment. Their parents forbade it, citing misaligned Solkin days. Bad timing. So they waited 13 years for their birth glyphs to align favorably again. On that night, they entered the ball court, alone, dressed in feathered cloaks. They performed a 2-person dance mimicking the eclipse. She turned away. He followed. They circled, merged, and finally collapsed into each other. When the city awoke, they were gone. But their footprints, painted in ash and blood, remained. The next calendar cycle was named after them, the lovers who waited. And what about abstinence? Yes, the Maya believed in its power too. Some rulers fasted from sex before key rituals to build tension. The act of withholding wasn't repression, it was storage. Energy banked for release. One priestess described it as winding the serpent. The longer it coils, the more powerful the strike. Your final image. A stela from Yachilan shows a couple carved back to back, eyes closed, hands bound not in chains, but in vines. The caption, "They stopped the world to make it turn." It's not a paradox. It's Mayan intimacy logic. Sometimes, in the stillness of union, the entire universe catches its breath. And you, lying here now, under your own small sky, pulse steady, thoughts warm, understand something new. Desire isn't chaos. It's clockwork. Your longing isn't weakness. It's mechanism. And when you give in to love, not mindless but aligned, you're not off track. You're on time. You blink once, maybe twice, and the night opens like a petal. But this time, it's different. The jungle doesn't rustle. The air doesn't hum. Everything around you feels like it's holding its breath. Because what you've stumbled into now, this final layer of Mayan myth, is the deepest one. The world doesn't just end. It doesn't just begin. It does both, over and over, climaxing and collapsing in a rhythm older than stone. And the gods? They're not just actors in this cosmic play. They're lovers. Exhausted, furious, desperate lovers. The kind who break universes just to get one more kiss. Tonight, you're not watching the apocalypse. You're watching it moan itself into existence. Start with the myth of the maze god. He dies. He descends. He gets torn apart by the lords of Xibalba, ground down like flour. And then, he rises. Not because someone saves him, but because someone remembers him. A lover. A twin. A fragment of divine desire still echoing in the dark. The world is reborn when that desire becomes too loud to ignore. This isn't resurrection through sacrifice. It's resurrection through longing. Now shift upward. The hero twins. Remember them? Their journey through the underworld ends not in battle, but in performance. They act. They dance. They seduce death with illusion. And when they succeed, they don't just escape, they replace death. The underworld itself gets remodeled, retrofitted to fit their need. And it's through their erotic cleverness, not brute strength, that the world restarts. Because in Mayan logic, creation isn't a bang, it's a gasp. Let's move to the stars. Every 5,125 years, the Mayan calendar restarts. And each great cycle is said to end with a kind of cosmic intimacy gone wrong. The gods get out of sync. Time stumbles. Love frays. And the only way to fix it? A ritual so potent, it restitches the sky. One tale tells of the sky serpent and the earth crocodile, eternal lovers bound by obligation. When they forget each other, drought comes. But when they reunite, when their stormy embrace darkens the whole sky, rain returns. Crops grow. People kiss. Time resumes. Now your Sex with Kings story. According to a lesser-known temple inscription from Kirigua, one royal couple was believed to be the literal avatars of celestial bodies. She, the moon, he, the planet Venus. Their nightly unions were timed to the arc of Venus's descent and the moon's waxing phase. On the final night of their ritual year, they made love in public, silhouetted behind a thin obsidian screen so only their movements were visible. The crowd chanted calendar glyphs while incense billowed. At climax, the king cried out the start of the new cycle. And just like that, history reset itself. Now for your fringe gem. A handful of ceramic plates depict constellations mid-copulation. No joke. One especially wild piece shows two star clusters intertwining as a serpent coils around them, mouths open. The caption? When the sky breathes, the world is born again. This wasn't pornography, it was prophecy in clay. Astronomical climax rendered as calendar math. Foucault would lean in here, whispering, "Power is in the structure." But the Maya flip it. Structure is born of passion. The temples don't stand because they were planned. They stand because someone needed to express longing in limestone. And those carvings? Not just records. They're arguments, love letters, desperate cries across centuries. Remember me, reset me, rebirth me. And let's not forget sound. The end of the world wasn't quiet. In Mayan myth, it begins with laughter, the cruel laughter of gods out of sync. But the rebirth, that starts with a sigh, a groan, a low, shared breath that builds into rhythm. That's why drum beats accompany eclipse rituals, why flutes mimic the wind before storms. The gods remember each other through vibration, through echo, through the ancient grammar of gasps. Now your final human tale, a scribe named Sakal, who believed he could delay the end of the world with poetry. He wrote nightly in a temple chamber, each poem a seductive plea to the cosmos. His final entry just days before his death reads, "If love can birth a universe, let these words be contractions." His bones were found beneath a stela shaped like a pregnant moon. And now here you are, skin warm, thoughts thick, eyes heavy. You've walked with jaguars, kissed constellations, steamed in the womb of the gods. You've watched stars flirt, lovers bleed, animals whisper truths into your dreams. You've learned that the Mayan world didn't separate intimacy from cosmos. They fused them. Every touch was a glyph, every breath a ritual, every climax a reset. So you lie back one last time and feel it, that low rumble, not from your chest but from the earth beneath. The world doesn't end with a roar, it ends with a shiver. And just before it starts again, just before the gods remember how much they need each other, there is a pause, a breath, a stillness. That's where you are now, floating in the pause between worlds, between myth and memory, between heartbeat and history. Your breath slows now. No more temples, no more fire, just you and the deep quiet that comes after knowing too much. Your limbs feel soft, your chest warm, your mind full of strange shapes and familiar feelings. Let them settle. Let the stars above hum gently like lullabies. The gods are done dancing for now. The jungle has exhaled. You are safe. You are held. Time has no edge here, just circles, just ripples, just the slow rise of tomorrow. Wherever you are, however you love, the cosmos sees you, and it's smiling. End of script. Sweet dreams.